I don't want a woman with a big belly like that. You'll have to take care of the baby all by yourself while I'm stuck with this big belly being pregnant for 9 months. He looked at me with disgust, and a mean smile appeared on his face. I knew this would happen someday, and even though I saw it coming, I went to my room right away. When I came back, I had papers in my hand. Okay, here are the divorce papers. I handed them to Anton. He looked shocked and shouted, "What's going on? Why are you doing this all of a sudden?" "Well, you suggested it first. Hurry up and sign it. I'll hand it in tomorrow," I dared him. His face went red quickly as my words hit him hard. "Just watch. You'll regret treating me badly and looking down on me," I declared. "My name's Helen. I'm 26 and a housewife. 2 years ago, I worked at a mobile company. That's where I met Anton Cade, my boss, when I was 24. We fell in love fast and got married. Anton, 3 years older, was really supportive, especially when I was new and clueless at work. I couldn't thank him enough for teaching me everything. As we worked together, we became friends and started going out for dinner often. When he asked me out, I was thrilled, especially because I'd never dated anyone before. It's a bit embarrassing, but I was always more into cartoon characters than real guys. But with everyone around me getting married, I started feeling the pressure. When I fell for Anton, I promised myself he'd be my first and only love. So when we started dating and got married a year later, I was so happy. Anton was handsome and popular with the ladies at work. I was proud to be his wife, and people congratulated us, saying they were happy for us. But little did I know what was coming. The day after we got married, I told my coworkers, "I'm married now, so I'm quitting my job." Just when we were excitedly beginning our married life, Anton dropped a bombshell, saying, "I've always wanted my wife to focus on the home. Don't worry, I can take care of us financially." "But this is so sudden. You never mentioned this before," I responded. Anton had never brought up me quitting my job before we got married. "I got this job through my dad's connection, so leaving without notice wouldn't be right." I wanted to explain, but Anton's eyes silently warned me not to bring it up. So I stayed quiet. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "I know I should have told you, but it's decided. Starting tomorrow, you're not going to work," Anton declared. What a shock. Anton's announcement about me staying home starting tomorrow hit me so suddenly I felt dizzy. But Anton was firm in his decision. I couldn't argue with him, considering he used to be my boss. Even though I had to leave my job abruptly, I was determined to make our marriage succeed. Since Anton chose me and entrusted me with running the household, I wanted to live up to his expectations. I didn't want to seem like a bad wife. I put all my effort into the housework, cooking meals, especially Anton's favorites, and setting the table with as much food as possible. Even though Anton ate without saying whether he liked it or not, I secretly hoped for a word of appreciation. After quitting my job and losing my identity, I craved that acknowledgement. "Anton, I have an important meeting tomorrow. Is my jacket clean?" I asked. "Yes, it's ready," Anton replied. He sometimes showed a traditional, controlling side. Despite this, I reminded myself how lucky I was to have married him and tried to meet his expectations. With no income of my own, living with Anton was my only option for a normal life. Although our relationship often felt more like employer and maid than husband and wife, things were mostly smooth. But one day, I fell ill and couldn't get out of bed. Feeling weak, I thought, I'll catch up on chores tomorrow. Anton stormed into the bedroom and snapped, "What are you doing? Get up and make some food." He kicked the blanket off me. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well today. Can you manage something for yourself?" I pleaded, hoping for sympathy. Instead of understanding, Anton scowled and said, "You don't even work, and you're lying down because you're a little sick. Pathetic. Get up." He kicked me again, and I got up stunned. I couldn't believe he would demand chores from his sick wife. I'd never seen this side of him before we got married. Maybe I missed it, but it was too much. I did my chores, tears streaming down my face. After days of feeling unwell, I realized I'd missed my period. Rushing to the drugstore, I bought a pregnancy test. When it turned out positive, tears of joy streamed down my face. I couldn't wait to tell Anton when he got home from work. But when he finally returned well past midnight, reeking of alcohol and stumbling, my excitement waned. It was surprising how much he'd drunk, especially without warning me when I had dinner prepared. Despite my eagerness to share the news, I hesitated seeing him in such a state. "I haven't been to the doctor yet, so it's not confirmed," I started, hoping to share our happiness. But Anton's reaction was unexpected. His face darkened as he muttered, "A child? What have you done?" It was a side of Anton I'd never seen before, his tone unlike anything I'd heard from him. "What? I don't want a kid. This is the worst. If you're having it, raise it yourself." His harsh words hit me like a slap, and he stormed off to the bathroom, tossing his clothes aside. It was unreal. I couldn't understand why he'd say such hurtful things about our baby instead of being happy. The joy I felt moments ago vanished, replaced by deep sadness. How could he say that? He'd never mentioned not wanting kids before. We hadn't even talked about birth control, so I naturally assumed we both wanted children. Hearing him call having a child the worst was beyond belief. As I hung up Anton's jacket and went to take his shirt to the laundry, something caught my eye. "What's this?" A piece of paper peeked out of the dress shirt pocket, clearly a receipt by its texture. At first, I thought it was just from tonight's outing, ready to toss it away. But then I saw the name of the establishment. "Is this from a motel?" My hand shook as I held the receipt, confirming my suspicion. It was indeed from a motel. The weight of this discovery pressed heavily on my heart. Why doesn't Anton love me? Isn't marriage supposed to be built on love, especially since we've only been married for a little over a year? How could this be happening? I'd spent years lost in fantasies, never fully experiencing a real relationship. I couldn't immediately accept this harsh reality. But the idea of Anton cheating started to make sense, and pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Had Anton been using me since the beginning of our marriage? Was he truly in love with someone else while I was just a convenient servant? All these doubts churned inside me. Was that why he reacted so harshly to my pregnancy news? As I wrestled with these thoughts, nausea overwhelmed me, and I grew convinced that something wasn't right. Yes, it's clear now. Maybe he pushed me out of the company because his mistress was there. It felt like pieces were falling into place, as if he'd married me for stability rather than love. Reality blurred with my imagination, but his heartless words after learning about my pregnancy couldn't be ignored. That day, I resolved to gather evidence of Anton's affair. From then on, his cold treatment of me was undeniable. It was as if he couldn't forgive me for getting pregnant, even though he knew I was suffering from morning sickness. He'd deliberately eat strong-smelling foods near me and criticize my housework, making me do it over again. My pregnant body endured a lot, and my heart weighed heavy. But despite it all, I continued to investigate his affair. Anton was glued to his cell phone, even taking it to the bathroom, making it impossible for me to sneak a peek. When I managed to sneak into his room, it was spotless, with nothing suspicious in sight. He was always meticulous at work, and his desk was impeccably organized. I realized it would be hard to catch him off guard directly. I kept checking his pockets for any clues, like receipts, but my investigation was proving tough. The idea of hiring a detective crossed my mind, but I didn't have the money for it. Lost in thought about my situation, I got a surprise call. It was my father, who rarely contacted me, so I was curious about why he was calling. "Hey, it's your dad. How's everything?" he asked. His call caught me off guard, knowing how busy he usually is. "Dad, what's up? Aren't you swamped with work?" I questioned. "My team's been handling things well, so I've got some free time," he explained. My dad's the CEO of a company in Canada, and work has always been his priority. I didn't have many memories of playing with him as a kid, but I respected his dedication, so his call left me curious. I asked, "What's going on?" As he began to speak, he dropped a bombshell. "Seriously?" I exclaimed, struggling to believe it. "Yeah, he wouldn't make this up. I need you to trust me on this," my dad reassured me. At first, I was speechless, but as it sunk in, I felt relieved. "Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate it," I said gratefully before ending the call. After all my dating, I was starting to see results, and it felt like a small victory. But with each new piece of information came a surge of anger and frustration over the ongoing tension with Anton. Months dragged on, and our relationship stayed strained. Then, something happened that turned our world upside down. At 9 months pregnant, I treaded carefully around Anton, always on edge. I tried to keep to myself, living a quiet, restricted life. One evening, I served dinner as usual, and when Anton got home, we sat down to eat. As I quietly took my first bite, Anton suddenly slammed his fork down. "What's this? It's awful," he yelled, hurling the food I'd made onto the floor. His sudden rage left me bewildered, struggling to make sense of it all. Anger surged within me as I watched him dismiss the meal I prepared. I've been thinking about this for a while. Lately your cooking has been bland, Anton criticized, claiming my meals lacked flavor. It was true that during my pregnancy I'd been toning down the spices for health reasons, but it was only temporary. If he wanted more flavor, he could have added seasoning himself. Why did he have to react like this? Before I could respond, Anton delivered another blow with his hurtful words. I don't want a wife with a big belly like yours. You'll be on your own with the baby while I deal with my own issues, he spat, his eyes full of malice and a cruel smile on his lips. I had feared this confrontation, but I'd hoped for a different outcome. Without a word, I stormed off to my room, retrieved a document, and returned to confront Anton. Here are the divorce papers, I declared, thrusting the documents in front of him. Anton's face twisted in shock. What on earth? Why now? He stuttered. Your idea. Sign them quickly. I'll file them tomorrow, I retorted. Truthfully, I'd been considering divorce since I suspected Anton's infidelity. But with a baby on the way, I hesitated, unsure if I could manage alone. Now though, I had a plan. My resolve seemed to provoke Anton's, his face boiling with anger. You'll regret this. Every moment you belittled and controlled me, I warned, unwavering. I'll manage. Don't worry, I reassured him. Perhaps annoyed by my determination, he snatched the papers and began filling them out. Here. If this is what you want, take it, he grumbled. Thank you, I replied, surprised at how smoothly Anton handed over the divorce papers. The next day, I wasted no time in submitting them and leaving the house. I knew he'd be in for a shock when he got home from work. Moving in with my parents seemed like the right move, especially with my dad returning to the US from Canada. I was grateful for their support and fed up with life with Anton. On a day I left, Anton called 3 times, but I ignored everyone. Eventually, the call stopped. It was clear I meant little to him. He was probably content with his mistress, maybe even considering remarriage. I'd moved on from Anton, and 6 months had flown by. My baby arrived safely, and I was happily settled with my parents. Life was peaceful until Anton called again. At first, I ignored his calls, but his persistence forced me to answer. What do you want now? I asked, wary of his tone. Why were you on that show? And since when were you the daughter of a CEO with millions? Anton's voice boomed with surprise and anger. It turned out he'd seen a TV show broadcasted after I returned home. I'd been approached by a TV station because of my father's position as the CEO of a top global tech company. They featured our family's lavish lifestyle, filming at our house and discussing our wealth, estimating it at around $10 million. I hadn't expected Anton to see the show, but the power of TV is remarkable. By the way, I didn't mention I have a $33 million inheritance, which is why I could divorce you, I calmly replied. My father told me about it, giving me the confidence to live comfortably after our divorce. Anton's immediate reaction was pure fury. What? That's underhanded. Why keep this from me? Half of it belongs to me, doesn't it? Give me the money, he demanded. Just as I thought, seeing the show only made you think of squeezing money out of me. Gifts from parents don't count in property distribution. And let's not forget your own wrongdoing, I retorted. I'm tired of your anger, Anton. You made the call. You should know better. You can't blame me for your actions. You cheated, didn't you? And with someone from your company, a junior, right? You started before we even got married. I revealed, shocking Anton with the information I got from my father. Finally, I had the upper hand. Did you think I wouldn't find out? My father has connections in your company. One of them spilled the beans about your affair. I never brought it up, but I will be asking for child support, I declared. Anton, still in denial, protested. Stop joking. Why should I pay? It's your fault for getting pregnant and slacking off with the housework. Hearing Anton blame you without owning up to his own mistakes was unbelievable. How could I have ever been married to someone so lacking in common sense? I knew leaving him was the right decision. I thought as Anton's pitiful plea reached my ears. I'm broke. My wife spent all my money, and now I'm drowning in debt, he lamented, leaving me more dumbfounded than angry. I never want to deal with such an unreasonable person again, I declared, gripping my phone firmly. Your words are ridiculous. I want nothing to do with you. My lawyer will handle child support. Don't call me and you won't see our child anymore. Goodbye. Wait, Anton pleaded, but I didn't entertain him. After pouring out my emotions, I hung up and blocked his number, taking a deep breath. It's over now, right? No more calls from Anton. I don't want him disrupting our peaceful life, I reassured myself. Just then, I heard my baby crying from the other room, and I hurried to comfort them. It turned out Anton started paying child support each month, as a former colleague revealed. He claimed his new wife was a big spender, and he struggled to cover his living costs with mounting debt. Apparently, he reached out to me hoping for a share of my inheritance, but with me not budging, he found himself drowning in expenses, his income falling short. Whether it was pride or financial pressure, Anton's life took a downward spiral. To add to his troubles, he foolishly began his job hunt after leaving his current company, leading to financial hardship. Learning this from a colleague left me unmoved. He brought this upon himself. His cruel words and actions won't be forgotten easily. I hope he learns from his mistakes. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying parenting with my parents, free from financial worries. With the possibility of inheriting the company, I'm ready to step up. Like my hardworking father, I'm determined to make my mark.
Hey, I'm Ava. I run my own business making designer furniture. It's been a wild ride getting here by 33, but I wouldn't have it any other way. My life was mostly about work, though deep down, I hoped for more, like a family of my own. It was during one of my rare vacations down in Santa Cruz that everything changed. I was on the beach, trying to learn surfing, mostly failing and falling flat on my face into the waves. That's when Jake showed up with his surfboard under his arm, looking like he owned the place. "Need some help there?" he called out, jogging over. His voice was playful, a slight tease hanging in the air between us. I brushed the sand off my face, trying to look a bit less like a drowned rat. "Do I look like I need help?" He laughed, a deep, hearty sound that made me smile, despite my embarrassment. "Well, you ain't exactly riding the waves like a pro." I shrugged and gave him a challenging look. "Maybe I'm just enjoying my unique style of surfing. Ever thought of that?" "Unique's one word for it," he grinned, extending a hand to help me up. "Name's Jake. I teach surfing around here. How about I give you a few pointers? No charge." I figured why not. It wasn't like I had anything better to do, and the guy seemed genuine enough. So, I took him up on his offer. Turned out, Jake was a natural teacher. He was patient, explaining things clearly without making me feel like an idiot. "Balance is key," he instructed as he guided me on the board. "You gotta feel the wave, be part of it, not fight it." Easier said than done, but with Jake's guidance, I actually managed to stand and ride my first wave. I couldn't believe it. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off again. "That's it. You're a natural," Jake cheered, clapping his hands. I paddled back, flushed with excitement. "Thanks, Jake. I guess you're a pretty good teacher." That night, we talked like old friends. Turns out, Jake moved around a lot as a kid, never really settling anywhere until he hit the surf towns. He loved the ocean, said it was the only place he felt at home. "And what about you, Ava? What's your story?" I told him about my business, how I'd started from scratch, working day and night to make it something real. He listened, really listened. And that's how it started, really. A simple meeting on the beach that turned into dinner, and a conversation that felt like it could go on forever. I didn't know then that I'd fall for him, hard and fast. But that comes later. For now, it was just two people, laughing over fish tacos, the ocean whispering in the background. I smiled. Maybe I'd just found that someone. Life after meeting Jake took a fast track, like a runaway train I had no interest in stopping. Our courtship was a whirlwind, filled with laughter, beach days, and long, heartfelt conversations under the stars. It didn't take long before he popped the question. We were at our favorite spot on the beach, the same place where we first met. "Hey Ava," Jake started, his voice unusually shaky. "You and me, we're kinda great together, huh?" I laughed, a little nervous, sensing something big was coming. Kinda great? That's the understatement of the year. He took a deep breath and went down on one knee, right there in the sand. Marry me, Ava. Let's not just be kinda great. Let's be amazing, together, forever. My heart skipped about a dozen beats. Yes, I blurted out, more tears in my eyes than I'd care to admit. Yes, I'll marry you, Jake. The wedding was everything I could have hoped for. It wasn't large, just close friends and family at a small chapel near the beach. The reception was at a local hall, decorated with simple flowers and strings of lights that made everything feel magical. But as we settled into married life, I started to see sides of Jake I hadn't known before. He loved the finer things, expensive clothes, high-end gadgets, and soon, a sleek sports car that ate up more money than I wanted to think about. One evening, as I was working through some designs, Jake strolled into my office, a glossy brochure in hand. "Hey babe, check this out," he said, laying the brochure on my desk. I glanced at it, my stomach dropping as I saw the price tag on the car he was pointing at. "Jake, this is really expensive. Are you sure we can manage this right now?" He leaned back, a frown creasing his brow. "Come on, Ava. You make good money, right? We can afford a little luxury." I sighed, knowing I'd regret it, but also not wanting to fight. "Fine, but this is a big purchase. We should be careful with spending for a while." "Trust me, babe, it's all under control," he assured me, but his casual dismissal of my concerns stung more than I expected. His parents, too, became a regular fixture in our lives. His mom, Marlene, and dad, Phil, were charming at first. They'd often come over, praising the house, the food, everything. But soon, every visit came with requests. "Ava, dear, you have such good taste. Could you help us pick out some new curtains? We just don't know what to get," Marlene would say, her eyes darting around our living room appreciatively. Sure, I helped. I even paid, thinking it was no big deal, a way to make them feel welcome. One night, after they'd left from one of their many visits, I collapsed onto the couch next to Jake, exhaustion nipping at my heels. "Your parents are really taking this family thing seriously, huh?" He chuckled, not catching my tone. "Yeah, they love you. You're like the daughter they never had." I bit my lip, not sure how to say what was on my mind without causing a rift. "It's just, they expect a lot. Gifts, money, time. It's getting to be a bit much, don't you think?" Jake's face hardened a little, his voice sharp. "They're just being friendly, Ava. They like spending time with us, that's all." I wanted to argue, to tell him it felt like more than that, like we were a bank they could take from without asking. But I held my tongue, the words happy wife, happy life echoing ironically in my head. Jake's attitude toward having kids started to put a real strain on us. I always knew I wanted to be a mom, but Jake's insistence on having a son was something else. It wasn't just a wish, it was an obsession. One night, after dinner, we sat down in the living room, each with a glass of wine, trying to unwind. That's when I decided to bring up the topic again. "So, Jake, do you really think it's that important to have a boy?" I asked, feeling my stomach knot up. Jake looked up then, his expression serious. "Of course, Ava. You know how important it is for me to have a son. Someone to carry on the family name, you know?" "But what if we have a daughter?" I pressed, needing him to see my point of view. He shrugged, a bit too casually. "We keep trying until we get a boy, I guess." The simplicity in his answer chilled me. "And what, the daughters we might have aren't good enough?" "Ava, come on, don't start that," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not about good enough. It's about having a son. My dad's the same way, you know that." The conversation hung heavily between us, unresolved. It was the same every time. Jake wanted a son so badly that it started to overshadow everything else in our relationship. When we learned that natural conception was off the table, IVF seemed like our only option. I threw myself into the process, researching clinics and treatments. The day we went to the clinic to start the treatment, the air between us was tense. In the waiting room, Jake fiddled with the pamphlets on the coffee table, his knee bouncing up and down nervously. "So, they can do that thing, right? Where they make sure we get a boy?" he whispered, leaning close. I frowned. "It's not that simple, Jake. And it's not exactly ethical to pick and choose like you're ordering a custom car." The strain only deepened once we were in the thick of IVF treatments. The hormones, the doctor's appointments, and the waiting were brutal. And through it all, Jake's impatience for a son grew into something ugly, a shadow over our marriage. When we finally got the news that we were expecting, I was over the moon. But Jake's first question cut through my happiness like a knife. "Did they say if it's a boy?" "It's too early to tell," I snapped, hurt by his one-track mind. And when the ultrasound revealed we were having twin girls, I saw the disappointment on his face. He tried to mask it, but it was too late, I'd seen it. That night, as we lay in bed facing away from each other, the distance between us felt wider than ever. When I gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Ellie, I was over the moon, but Jake, he couldn't hide his disappointment. He wanted a son so badly it clouded everything else. One evening, while the girls were cooing in their crib, Jake came into the nursery. The look on his face was serious, like he was about to say something important. "Ava, we need to try again for a son," he said bluntly, no preamble. I was taken aback. "Jake, look at what we've got. They're perfect. Why isn't this enough?" He paced a little, before stopping and turning to face me. "It's not about them not being enough. It's about continuing the family name, Ava. You know this." I sighed, feeling the weight of his expectations pressing down on me. "We'll see," I replied, not committing but not dismissing him either. It was the easiest way to end the conversation without another argument. Not long after, life decided to test me again. Phil, Jake's dad, got seriously ill. One evening, Marlene, his mom, came over, wringing her hands with worry. "Ava, the surgery Phil needs, it's urgent, and his insurance won't cover all of it. We need $50,000. The amount made me choke a little. "That's a lot, Marlene." "I know, dear, but we're desperate. We wouldn't ask if there was any other way." I thought about it, the businesswoman in me kicking in. "I can lend you the money, but I'll need you to sign a receipt. It's just a safety measure." Marlene bristled a bit at that. "Really, Ava, a receipt? We're family." I stood firm. "It's nothing personal, Marlene. It's just how I handle things professionally. It's a lot of money." Reluctantly, she agreed, and the receipt was signed. Jake didn't take it well when he found out. "You made my mom sign a receipt? What's wrong with you, Ava?" "It's how I protect our future, Jake. And it's for our girls," I shot back, frustrated at having to justify myself. Things settled down a bit until the girls were about 6 months old. That's when I found out I was pregnant again, naturally this time. I was shocked and happy but scared to tell Jake. His reaction was just as I feared. "A son, Ava. It has to be a son. I don't need another girl," he said coldly when I told him. Months later, I gave birth to another beautiful girl. I named her Mia. Jake didn't come to the hospital, not even to see Mia, or help me home. I ended up taking a taxi, 1,000 worries in my head. When I got home, the house was quiet except for the sound of the babysitter in the nursery. Jake wasn't there. He came back the next day, looking like he hadn't slept at home. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice tight with a mix of anger and despair. "Out," was all he said, walking past me like I wasn't even there. He didn't even glance at Mia, his own daughter. The hurt from that cut deeper than anything else. Here I was, trying to keep our family together, and there he was, pulling further away every day. It was clear to me then that something had to change. Things had been rough since Mia was born, and they weren't getting any easier. Jake was hardly ever home, always at work, or so he said, and whenever he was around, he was distant, detached. Our financial arrangement had become a sore point. He stopped contributing to the household, saying, "You make enough for both of us, Ava. Handle it." Trying to discuss our issues felt like talking to a brick wall. He'd come home late, often just as I was putting the girls to bed, avoiding any real conversation. Even my in-laws added to the strain. Marlene would come over, not to see the girls, but to ask for favors or gifts. "Ava, dear, could you help me pick out a new microwave? You always choose the best appliances," she'd say, her compliments thinly veiling her true intentions. She barely glanced at her granddaughters playing on the floor beside her. Phil, after recovering from his surgery, didn't hold back his thoughts either. During one of his rare visits, he said bluntly, "We hoped for a grandson, Ava. These girls, they're fine, but a boy would have been better." But the real shock came when Jake stumbled in one night, looking more frazzled than usual. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Ava, I screwed up. Big time," he blurted out, sinking onto the sofa with his head in his hands. "What happened? Talk to me, Jake." "I lost money, a lot of it. At the casino. I've got creditors on my back now. They're not the kind of people you can just brush off," he admitted, his voice laced with panic. Fear gripped my heart, not just for our financial security, but for his safety. "How much, Jake?" "25,000, he whispered. Despite everything, my instinct was to protect him, our family. "Okay, we'll handle this. But you have to promise me, no more gambling. Ever." "I swear, Ava. No more gambling. I can't lose you or the girls." So, I did what I thought was necessary. I transferred $25,000 to clear his debts. After that, Jake's demeanor changed overnight. He was home more, engaged with the girls, constantly showering me with affection and gratitude. "You saved me, Ava. I don't know how to thank you enough," he'd say, kissing me goodbye in the mornings. Things had been looking up for a while, with Jake seemingly back on track and us spending more time as a family. I actually started to believe that maybe we had turned a corner, that maybe everything would be alright. But that hope shattered the night Jake didn't come home. I stayed up all night, pacing the floor, trying his phone over and over, but it just rang out. No answer. My mind raced with all sorts of dreadful thoughts. Had something happened to him? Or was it something else? By the time he walked through the door early the next morning, my relief turned to anger the moment I saw him casually stroll in and head straight to bed without so much as an explanation. "Where have you been all night?" I demanded, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. He mumbled something incoherent and pulled the covers over his head. "Tired, talk later," he said, his voice muffled by the pillow. "No, we're talking now, Jake. You can't just disappear and not expect me to worry." But he was already snoring, completely oblivious to my panic or anger. That was the last straw. I decided then and there that I needed to know what was really going on. The next day, I hired a private detective. A week later, the detective came back with news that crushed whatever was left of my trust. Jake had a mistress, and she was pregnant. Pregnant with a son. The irony of it stung like salt in a wound. But what cut even deeper was learning that the $25,000 I gave Jake to cover his supposed debts hadn't gone to any creditors. Instead, he'd bought his mistress a new car, a thank you present for carrying his son. I was seething with rage when I called Marlene, my mother-in-law, hoping for some semblance of support. "Marlene, Jake has a mistress, and she's pregnant. And he bought her a car with the money that was supposed to pay off his debts," I said, my voice shaking with fury and disbelief. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Marlene's voice, cold and sharp, came through. "Well, maybe if you had given him a son, he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you blaming me? For not having a son? That's why you think it's okay for your son to cheat?" "He needs an heir, Ava. It's important for men in our family to have a son," she insisted, as if that justified everything. "So my daughters mean nothing? Is that it?" I was nearly yelling now, my heart pounding in my chest. Ava, you need to calm down and stop overreacting. It's not the end of the world. You just need to take better care of yourself, be more attractive, maybe then my son wouldn't need to go elsewhere. The call ended with her hanging up on me, leaving me stunned and furious. The betrayal from Jake was one thing, but the betrayal from someone I considered family was too much. It was clear to me now that Jake and his family would never change. They'd chosen their path, and I needed to choose mine. Revenge wasn't a path I ever thought I'd take, but at that moment, it felt like the only way to reclaim some semblance of dignity. My next calls were to my lawyer, Claire, known for her no-nonsense approach to family law. Claire, I'm through being the understanding wife. It's time to push back, hard. I want full custody, and I want him to pay for what he's done, I told her, my voice steely. That evening, when Jake came home, I was ready for him. The moment he walked through the door, I could see the arrogance in his stance, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. Jake, we need to talk, I said, my voice calm but firm. He smirked, tossing his keys on the table. What's up? Another lecture about how I should spend my time? No, not a lecture. I know about your mistress, and the child. I'm done. Here, I said, pushing the divorce papers across the table to him. I've signed them. It's over. His smirk vanished, replaced by a frown. You're serious? Look, I'm tired of this life too. Your constant nagging, the kids screaming. I was going to leave anyway. Good. You should leave. But first, the car keys. You'll return the car and the $25,000 you spent on your girlfriend. It wasn't your money to spend, I demanded, my tone unyielding. He scoffed. Come on, Ava, be reasonable. I need that money for my son. You can't do this to me. You can't just strip me of everything. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm adding a lawsuit for the emotional distress you caused. You and your mistress will both pay, I declared, the finality in my voice echoing in the room. The legal battle that followed was intense. Jake tried to argue that he had no money, that I was being unreasonable and cruel. But the evidence was stacked against him, the transactions, the messages, his continual deceit. It was all laid bare for the court to see. The judge was stern as he handed down the verdict. Mr. Thompson, it seems you've not only breached the trust of your marriage, but also misused funds for personal gain at the expense of your family. You are hereby ordered to pay $20,000 in damages to Mrs. Thompson, another $20,000 from your mistress, and $400 per month per child in alimony. Jake's face during the ruling was a picture of shock and defeat. Forced to take out a loan, he had to scramble to cover the payments ordered by the court. The courtroom drama had barely settled when my in-laws decided to confront me. They stormed into my house like a hurricane, blaming me for everything under the sun. You've destroyed our family and ruined our son, Marlene shouted, waving her arms dramatically. Phil chimed in, his voice just as accusing. You took everything from him, made him out to be a monster. I listened quietly, letting them vent their anger and frustration. They hurled insult after insult, but I stood my ground, the calm in the storm. After they had exhausted their tirade, I calmly pulled out the receipt for the $50,000 I had loaned them for Phil's surgery. You owe me $50,000. I was generous then, but now I need that money back. Their anger turned to panic. We don't have that kind of money, Ava. We're old, we're not working, Marlene pleaded, tears starting to form in her eyes. That's not my problem. You signed an agreement. You owe me this money, I stated firmly, my resolve unshaken by their distress. Seeing that I wasn't backing down, Phil resignedly nodded. We'll find a way. We'll pay you back. True to their word, they took out a loan to pay me back and had to return to work to manage the payments. It was tough for them, but it was the consequence of their actions and decisions. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. I focused on raising my daughters and running my business. Despite the challenges, I never regretted standing up for myself. My girls were thriving, growing more beautiful and intelligent each day, and my business was doing well, giving us a comfortable life. Jake's fate turned out quite differently. Burdened by debt and unable to keep up with the financial demands of his actions, he was forced to work multiple jobs. He left his mistress after she gave birth to a daughter, not the son he so desperately wanted. The irony of it wasn't lost on me, but I felt no pleasure in his misfortunes. Months later, a knock came at my door. It was Marlene and Phil, looking older and more worn than I remembered. "Ava, we've been thinking a lot about what happened. We're sorry," Marlene started, her voice trembling. Phil nodded, his eyes avoiding mine. "We miss the girls. We were wondering if, maybe we could see them?" I looked at them, seeing the genuine regret in their eyes, but the pain they had inflicted was too deep, and their betrayal too significant. "I appreciate your apology," I began, my voice steady. "But I can't let you back into our lives. Not after everything. The girls are doing well, and we're moving on. It's better this way." Marlene's eyes filled with tears, and Phil placed a hand on her shoulder. "We understand. We wanted to try," Phil said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wish you the best, but please respect our wishes and give us our space," I replied, closing the door gently but firmly. Turning back to my home, to the laughter of my daughters playing in the living room, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had come through so much, their little faces reminders of why every struggle was worth it. I had made tough decisions, but they were the right ones for us. My name is Anna, and for the longest time, my life was all about chemistry and work. After high school, I threw myself into university, studying to become a chemical engineer. Then it was straight to the lab, developing new polymer compounds. My personal life? Didn't even make the to-do list. It was work, more work, and, well, you get it. Then, one unexpected night, everything shifted. I didn't even want to go to that party. It was one of those "you have to come, Anna" situations where my friend Jenna practically dragged me out the door. "It'll be fun," she said. I doubted that, but I went. At the party, Jenna was in her element, chatting up everyone. Then she grabs this guy by the arm and pulls him over to where I was nursing my drink in silence. "Anna, meet Tom," she said, a little too enthusiastically for my liking. "Tom, this is the genius chemist friend I was telling you about." Tom looked a bit taken aback, his eyes wide as he took me in. "Hi," he said, his voice uncertain. "Jenna's told me quite a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "Yeah, very impressive," he managed, though it sounded like he was talking about a scary movie, not a person. We somehow stumbled through the initial awkwardness and found a quiet corner. Turns out, Tom worked as a manager at a trading company and was a lot more down to earth than our rocky start suggested. He confessed later that night that he'd been intimidated at first, thinking I was too smart for someone like him. That made me laugh. It was refreshing, really. We started seeing each other, and a year flew by. I was surprised at how serious we'd gotten, considering how I used to dodge anything personal, like a chemical spill. Then came the day I met his family. His mom was a sweetheart, welcoming me with open arms. But his sister, Laura? A different story. Right from the start, she looked at me like I was a problem she hadn't figured out how to solve yet. During dinner, I tried to make conversation, asking her about her interests. She just smirked and said, "So, you're the chemist? You cook up stuff in the lab, and now you're here to cook my brother's brain?" I was taken aback, but managed a weak smile. I prefer to think I enlighten minds rather than cook them. Ethan, trying to cut the tension, jumped in. "Laura's always been protective of me," he explained. "She's not easy to win over, but don't take it personally." As if on cue, Laura leaned over and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "No one's good enough for my brother, remember that." Despite Laura's cold reception, Ethan and I got engaged and planned a modest wedding. On our wedding day, Laura's attitude was even more brazen. She rolled her eyes during our vows, snickered during the speeches, and complained loudly about the food and decorations. A couple of months had passed since Ethan and I said our vows. Just as we were settling into our new life, his mother, Mrs. Johnson, took a bad turn. Her illness baffled the doctors. No one could pinpoint what was wrong. She was confined to her bed, her body partially paralyzed, plagued by severe headaches and kidney pain. Ethan suggested that I move into their family home to help care for her, and given my fond relationship with his mother, I agreed without hesitation. From day one, the reality of our situation hit hard. Mrs. Johnson was in a bad way, rarely leaving her bed, and I took on much of the caregiving alongside Ethan. I bathed her, helped her change, and gently combed her hair, which, distressingly, came out in clumps more often than not. One evening, while Ethan was downstairs sorting through some bills, I broached a delicate subject with him in the kitchen. "Ethan, your mom's condition is worsening. Don't you think a nursing home with professional care might be better for her?" I suggested, hoping he'd see the sense in it. Ethan rubbed his forehead, the weight of the world seeming to press down on him. "I know, Anna, I know it's bad. But Laura, she's adamant about keeping Mom here. She says a nursing home would just make things worse." I sighed, my hands clenching in frustration. "But isn't it worse for her to suffer here without proper medical care?" Before Ethan could reply, Laura walked into the kitchen. Her presence was always like a storm brewing. "I heard that, Anna. You think you know better than us? My mother stays where she is," she snapped, her eyes flashing angrily. Realizing this wasn't a battle I could win today, I backed down. "Okay, Laura. I didn't mean to upset you. I just hate seeing her like this." After Laura left, Ethan whispered a tired apology. "I'm sorry. Laura's been through a lot. You know, with her husband passing and everything. She's not herself." "Yeah, I get it," I replied, though I felt a bitter edge to my words. "But it's not just about what she wants. It's about what's right for your mom." Ethan nodded, looking equally torn. "I know. Let's just give it some more time. Maybe she'll come around." Time passed slowly after that conversation. Days turned into weeks. I spent hours by Mrs. Johnson's side, watching her struggle with every passing day. Her room became a world unto itself, filled with the sounds of her labored breathing and the soft hum of the medical equipment that seemed to multiply with each week. Laura's resistance, Ethan's indecision, and the daily sight of Mrs. Johnson's suffering weighed heavily on my heart. Moving in here, I had hoped to make things better, to be a part of the family in every way that counted. But as each day passed, I felt more like an outsider fighting an unwinnable battle, clinging to the hope that somehow, someway, I could make a difference in this house that had become my home. Living with Ethan's family was proving to be more of a challenge than I'd ever expected. My relationship with Laura was especially tense. She always found something to criticize about me, and it didn't help that Ethan rarely stood up for me in these conflicts. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen trying to prepare a meal that Mrs. Johnson could easily swallow. Ethan was at work, and I was alone, which was becoming more and more my preference, given Laura's frequent, harsh visits. As I was mashing potatoes, the back door slammed. I didn't need to turn around to know Laura had entered. "Making a mess as usual, I see," Laura's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. I kept my focus on the task at hand, my grip tightening on the masher. "I'm making dinner for your mom. She needs something easy to eat." Laura scoffed, leaning against the counter and watching me like a hawk. "You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? Always hovering, always playing the devoted daughter-in-law. Makes me sick." I placed the bowl down with a little more force than necessary. "I'm not trying to be a saint, Laura. I'm trying to help." "Oh, cut the crap, Anna. We both know you're just waiting for her to kick the bucket. Playing the grieving widow ahead of time, are we?" Laura snapped, her eyes gleaming with something spiteful. It was another regular Sunday dinner when the tension hit a new high. Laura had just breezed into the dining room, fashionably late as usual, wearing a bright red dress. As we sat down to eat, Laura started right in, like she was waiting just for that moment. Really, Anna, must you always work so late? It's like you don't care about being a part of this family at all. I kept my eyes on my plate, trying to stay calm. I do my best, Laura. My work demands a lot. Unlike you, who doesn't even know what it's like to work. Ethan, who had been silent up until then, finally spoke, though not in my defense. Anna, please remember Laura is going through a lot right now with her husband's recent passing. Try to be a little more understanding. His words felt like a betrayal. I shot back before I could stop myself. Maybe if she dressed more like a widow rather than going to a party, I could take her grief a bit more seriously. The table went silent. Ethan's expression hardened. Anna, that's uncalled for. But it's true. I couldn't hold back. She criticizes everything I do, but barely looks in on her own mother. How is that fair? Laura slammed her fork down, standing abruptly. How dare you judge my grieving process? You have no idea what I'm going through. Ethan rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. Anna, can we talk about this later? Please, let's just finish dinner. I nodded, tight-lipped, and we ate the rest of the meal in uncomfortable silence. After dinner, I tried to clear the air with Ethan, but it was clear his patience was wearing thin. Anna, I know it's hard, but you have to try harder with Laura. She's my sister. She's family. And what am I? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You're my wife, and I love you, but Laura's been in my life a lot longer. You two need to sort this out. I felt alone, truly alone, even though Ethan was right there. It seemed like no matter what I did, it would never be enough for Laura, or, it seemed, for Ethan. 2 months had passed in a blur of daily routines and silent meals until the day we lost Mrs. Johnson. Her death was both a shock and a sorrow that gripped the household, pulling us all into a deep, somber state. Ethan was devastated, his grief palpable and heavy. At the funeral, under a dreary, cloud-filled sky, the tension that had been simmering between me and Laura finally boiled over. As people quietly murmured their condolences, Laura cornered me by the old oak near her mother's grave. This is your fault, you know. Laura hissed, her eyes sharp and accusing. If you had cared for her properly, she'd still be here. I felt a flash of anger, but I kept my voice steady. Laura, I did everything I could. She needed professional care, more than what we could give at home. Excuses, just excuses. Laura snapped back, her voice low but fierce. You just didn't want the burden, did you? I tried to keep calm, but her words stung. That's not true, and you know it. I cared for your mother every day. Laura scoffed, shaking her head before storming off. The days that followed were filled with quiet mourning. I tried to give Ethan the space to grieve, but the house felt colder, emptier. While tidying up Mrs. Johnson's room one afternoon, I stumbled upon some old medical documents tucked away in her desk. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began to read through them. According to the files, Mrs. Johnson had been in excellent health just a year ago, but her condition had deteriorated rapidly, leading to the failure of several organs all at once. Later that evening, I brought it up with Ethan. It's odd, isn't it? Her health declined so suddenly. And it says here multiple organ failure was the cause. Ethan, still looking tired and worn from the days of grieving, nodded slowly. Yeah, it's strange. The same thing happened to Laura's husband. He also had multiple organ failures. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered something from my chemistry classes. Ethan, both your mom and Laura's husband had severe hair loss before they passed, right? He looked up, puzzled by the direction of my question. Yes, that's right. Why? I hesitated, the implications swirling in my head. It's just, severe hair loss can sometimes be a sign of thallium poisoning. It's a stretch, but... Ethan cut me off, his voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. Let's not go down that road. It's been tough enough without adding wild theories into the mix. I nodded, agreeing outwardly, while inwardly I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the coincidence gave me. But I knew better than to push it further. Ethan was already on edge, and my accusations, or even suspicions, could drive a wedge too deep to remove. It started like any other morning, except for the moment I ran my hands through my hair and felt a clump come away with my fingers. Staring at the strands in horror, my mind raced. I knew something was terribly wrong. Frantically, I headed to the lab at work, my heart pounding as I ran tests on myself, a procedure I was all too familiar with but never thought I'd use in such a personal emergency. The results were as chilling as my suspicions, traces of thallium in my bloodstream. Rushing home, I confronted Ethan, my voice trembling with fear and urgency. "Ethan, I found thallium in my blood. Someone is trying to poison me." Ethan stared at me, his expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "You're being paranoid, Anna. You're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any." Before I could argue, Laura walked into the room, having overheard our conversation. "Oh, please. You work in a lab, Anna. For all we know, you could have brought that poison home yourself. Maybe you poisoned Mom," she snapped, her voice dripping with accusation. I was aghast, the room spinning around me as her words sank in. Ethan's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. "I can't do this anymore, Anna. You're too dangerous to be around. I want a divorce." My world crumbled in an instant. Laura smirked triumphantly. "You heard him. Get out of our house." Numb and heartbroken, I packed my belongings, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. Sitting amidst the unpacked boxes, the truth slowly pieced itself together in my mind. It was Laura. She had poisoned her mother and tried to poison me. Determined to find proof, I hired a private detective and handed over all the evidence I had, including the medical reports and my blood test results. 2 weeks dragged by with agonizing slowness until the detective came back with shocking news. Laura had burned through the fortune she inherited from her late husband and was drowning in debt. It became clear her motives were as toxic as the poison she favored. "This isn't just about inheritance," I told the detective, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "She's eliminating anyone who stands in her way. She could be targeting Ethan next." Armed with this new information, I knew I had to act fast to prevent further harm. I called Ethan, my voice trembling but firm. "Ethan, I have proof about Laura. We need to meet. You have to see this." His response was cold, dismissive. "You're crazy, Anna. I can't believe I ever trusted you." And with that, he blocked my number, cutting off any chance of further communication. Standing there, phone in hand, I felt a mix of rage and resolve wash over me. Despite everything that had happened, I knew I needed to confront Ethan and reveal Laura's malicious plans. Reluctantly, he let me into the house. The coolness inside was a stark contrast to the sweltering heat outside. Ethan was quiet, his face drawn and tired. There was a glass of lemonade on the table, condensation beating on the outside. "It's hot out there," he said, nodding towards the glass. "Here, have some lemonade." Thirsty and distracted by the tension, I took a few sips. Almost immediately, my stomach churned painfully, a sharp stab that doubled me over. "Ethan," I gasped, clutching my abdomen. "Where did this lemonade come from?" "It's just lemonade. Laura made it. What's wrong?" His brow furrowed, a mix of concern and confusion crossing his face. "The lemonade, it's poisoned," I managed to say between sharp breaths. "Laura's trying to kill us for the inheritance." Ethan's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "You're out of your mind, Anna. I'm tired of these crazy theories about Laura trying to kill someone." I was desperate, the pain overwhelming. "Please, Ethan, you have to believe me. Call 911. As I spoke, my vision began to blur, and I felt myself slipping towards the floor. The cold tiles were a harsh welcome as I hit them, semi-conscious, barely aware of my surroundings. Just then, Laura walked in, catching the tail end of our conversation. She looked from Ethan to me, lying helpless on the floor, and a smirk twisted her lips. Really, Ethan, she's losing it. Making up stories even now, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Ethan, conflicted and overwhelmed, rushed to the kitchen to fetch a cold compress, leaving me at Laura's mercy. Kneeling beside me, Laura leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. This is the end for you. In a few hours, the thallium will finish its work, and then Ethan's next. Once he's gone, everything will be mine. Her words were the last thing I heard before darkness enveloped me, pulling me into a deep, silent void. I awoke in the sterile brightness of a hospital room, the beeping of machines by my bedside punctuating the quiet. My mind felt foggy, memories of the last few days tangled like a ball of knotted yarn. The sharp pain in my stomach had subsided, replaced by a dull ache that seemed to echo deeper, reaching beyond the physical. The nurse, seeing me stir, came over with a reassuring smile. You're in the hospital, she explained. You've been out for days, but you're safe now. Did anyone come with me? My husband, Ethan? My voice was hoarse, the words scratching their way out. She checked her notes, her expression neutral. No, you were brought in by an ambulance alone. But your husband did call 911, even though there was some resistance, apparently. A doctor came in next, flipping through my chart with clinical detachment. You're lucky to be alive. We managed to remove the thallium from your system in time. A few more hours and... He didn't finish his sentence, but he didn't need to. As the reality of the situation settled in, I felt a mixture of relief and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I was saved, yes, but at what cost? Ethan's absence spoke volumes, and the hurt from it gnawed at me. Later, 2 police officers walked into the room. Their faces were stern, their notebooks ready. We understand you took matters into your own hands when you suspected poisoning. That was risky. You should have come to us as soon as you suspected something. Shame washed over me. He was right. I had been so caught up in proving Laura's guilt, I hadn't considered the dangers of facing her alone. I know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I needed proof. I thought I could handle it. The other officer softened slightly. Well, your actions did lead to uncovering the truth. We've apprehended your sister-in-law. It turns out she did poison her husband and your mother-in-law with thallium. We exhumed their bodies and confirmed it. She's facing multiple charges now. Their words were a cold comfort. Justice might have been served, but the cost was etched deeply into my heart. The officers thanked me before leaving, their steps echoing down the hall long after they were out of sight. Recovery was slow, and with it came the realization that the next steps were mine alone to take. Ethan's absence had severed whatever ties remained, and as painful as it was clear that my path forward would not include him. The trial of my sister-in-law, Laura, dragged on for months. It was a grueling process, filled with legal complexities and emotional turmoil. Throughout it all, the courthouse was a cold place, echoing with the footsteps of those seeking justice and those dreading it. I hadn't seen Ethan since I left the hospital, not until the first day of the trial. He sat there, a stoic figure, clinging to a version of his sister that no longer existed in the eyes of the law. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, Ethan refused to believe Laura's guilt. He whispered fiercely during recess, "You're wrong about her. The tests, the accusations, they're all mistakes. Laura's an angel, not a monster." I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I once loved, but found only a stranger. "How can you still say that after everything? Look at the evidence." He shook his head, dismissive and cold. "It's all circumstantial. You just want revenge on her, that's all this is." The trial continued, witnesses came and went, experts testified about the lethal levels of thallium found in the bodies, and slowly, the truth began to unfold before everyone in that courtroom. Laura sat there, mostly impassive, until the pressure of the undeniable evidence reached a breaking point. On the final day, when confronted with a particularly damning piece of evidence, Laura's composure cracked. With a cruel smile, she confessed, her voice chilling the room. "Yes, I did it. I poisoned them all, my husband, my mother, and I tried to kill Anna and Ethan too. All for the property, all for a life I deserved. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the shock palpable in the air. Ethan's face drained of color as he turned to look at me, the realization of his sister's true nature finally dawning on him. Laura was found guilty of double premeditated murder and attempted murder. The judge handed down a life sentence, ensuring she would spend her remaining days behind bars. Additionally, all her assets were seized and awarded to me as compensation for the immense physical and emotional harm she had caused. After the verdict, Ethan approached me outside the courtroom. His eyes were red, his voice shaky. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I was blind. Please, can we start over? Can we try again?" The pain of his betrayal, once sharp and biting, had settled into a dull, constant ache. I looked at him, really looked at him, and knew that too much had passed between us, too much had been broken. "No, Ethan. I can't. It's over." He reached out, but I stepped back, my decision firm. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." Leaving the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, not because I enjoyed the outcome, but because it was finally over. The battle was done, and justice, though it came at a steep price, was served. My recovery was slow, a process of rebuilding what Laura had tried to destroy. Physically, the poison had left its mark, and emotionally, the scars ran even deeper. I underwent treatment, attended therapy, and slowly pieced my life back together in a new apartment, far from the house that once promised a shared future with Ethan. Now, living alone, I work on forgetting, on healing. Some days are harder than others, the memories of betrayal and poison haunting me like ghosts of a past life. But each morning, I wake up and remind myself that I survived, that I am free from the web of deceit that once threatened to claim my life. Things were tough. After losing my job as a retail manager, it felt like every door in the industry slammed shut right in front of me. Months of job hunting led nowhere. It was Lisa, one of my oldest friends, who finally threw me a lifeline, albeit not the kind I expected. "Tessa, why don't you help out Tom?" she suggested one afternoon as we sipped coffee at my cramped kitchen table. "His place is a mess since his wife passed, and he could use someone to tidy up and maybe look after Jamie, the little one." I needed the cash. Desperation edged out pride, and I agreed. Lisa set up the meeting, and 2 days later, I found myself standing at Tom's door, my stomach in knots. Tom opened the door, a man in his mid-40s, with weary blue eyes and a tentative smile. "You must be Tessa. Lisa told me a lot about you. Come in, don't just stand there." The apartment was larger than I expected, a bit of dust here and there, but it felt like a place sucked dry of life, echoing with a silence that spoke of its missing joy. "Let me show you around," Tom said as he led me through the living room filled with pictures of a woman with a bright smile, his late wife, I assumed. We moved on to the kitchen, which looked like it hadn't seen a proper cleaning in weeks. "I know it's a mess. I'm not around much, work and all. And Jamie, well, he's 9. You can imagine." Tom chuckled dryly, his gaze flicking away. "There is also Mike, my eldest son, but he lives separately." There was an awkward silence before he hastily added, "So, about the job, I guess Lisa told you the basics?" "Yeah, cleaning, cooking a bit, and helping Jamie with his homework?" I confirmed. "That's about it. You'll have free run of the place during the day. I just really need someone to keep things afloat here." I nodded, understanding the weight of his admission. "I can do that, Tom. You can count on me." He showed a small, relieved smile. "Thanks, Tessa. Let's see how it goes, yeah?" Tom introduced me to Jamie that evening. The kid was a mop of untidy hair with curious eyes and a suspicious look as he sized me up from his spot on the living room couch. "You gonna be our new maid?" he asked bluntly, his voice sharp. "I guess you could say that. But I'm also here to help you out with your studies and stuff," I replied, trying to make my tone as friendly as possible. As I left their apartment that day, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. This was not the life I had planned, but somehow, it felt like exactly where I needed to be. The early days at Tom's apartment were like walking a tightrope. I kept busy scrubbing, cooking, and learning the ropes of managing a household that wasn't mine. It wasn't long before the place started looking more like a home than a storage unit. Tom seemed appreciative, though he was a man of few words. One Tuesday morning, I was elbow-deep in suds, scrubbing a stubborn stain off a frying pan when Jamie wandered into the kitchen. His hair was even messier than usual, and he had that scowl that seemed glued to his face. "Hey, you missed a spot," he said, pointing at a corner of the floor I hadn't gotten to yet. I rinsed the pan and turned to him, wiping my hands on my apron. "Want to give me a hand?" I asked. He rolled his eyes. "No way, that's your job." "Sure, but wouldn't hurt to help out a bit. Maybe learn something useful." I shot back with a half-smile, hoping to tease a bit of cooperation out of him. Jamie huffed, crossing his arms. "Whatever." That afternoon, I caught him struggling with his math homework. Numbers spread out on the table like they were parts of a puzzle he couldn't put together. I sat down next to him, my fingers tapping the table lightly. "Stuck?" I asked, glancing at the jumble of equations. "It's dumb. I don't get why I gotta learn this crap," he muttered, shoving the workbook away. "Let me show you something," I said, pulling the book back between us. For the next hour, I broke down the problems into steps that even I would have understood back in school. Slowly, Jamie started getting the hang of it, and when he solved the last problem on his own, he couldn't hide a proud grin. As days turned into weeks, I found myself more involved in their lives than I'd originally signed up for. Tom started coming home earlier, sometimes even helping with dinner. One evening, while I was chopping vegetables, he leaned against the counter, watching me work. "You've changed things around here, Tessa. For the better," he said, his voice low and sincere. "More than that. You're making us a family again." The word family hung in the air, heavy, but not unwelcome. I nodded, unsure of what to say, focusing instead on the carrots I was slicing. "Tessa," Tom continued, hesitating for a moment. "I was thinking, maybe it's time we made this arrangement a bit more permanent." I stopped chopping, my heart skipping a beat. "Permanent?" "Yeah, I mean, if you're up for it. I could use someone like you around, long term. Not just for the cleaning and cooking, but, you know, for everything." The offer caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, considering the weight of his words. I'd like that, Tom. I really would." From that point on, things felt different. Easier, somehow. Jamie started calling me by my first name instead of the maid, and Tom treated me more like a partner than an employee. We settled into a comfortable routine, the three of us, like pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their right place. Tom proposed one chilly evening, Jamie asleep, and his voice was steady, but his hands shook just a bit. "Tessa, I don't have much to offer but myself and this family. Will you marry me?" he had asked, his eyes hopeful yet scared of rejection. I didn't need a second to think about it. "Yes, Tom. Yes, I will." But not everyone was thrilled. When I told my mom, she was less than enthusiastic. "He's 14 years older than you, Tessa. And those kids. Are you ready to be a stepmom?" Her skepticism was like a bucket of cold water. "We love each other, Ma. That's what matters. And Jamie and Mike? They're great kids. I can handle it," I countered, but she wasn't convinced. And so, she came around, showing up at the mayor's office on our wedding day in her best dress, her smile tight but genuine. The ceremony was brief, the mayor reciting the vows with all the enthusiasm of someone who'd done this too many times. But when Tom slipped the ring on my finger, it felt like the world just paused for us. Starting our married life, I transitioned from the hired help to the lady of the house. It felt different waking up and not having to prove my worth through scrubbed floors and spotless counters. I was more than the cleaner now. I was a wife, a stepmom, part of a family. Life felt fuller, richer. But being a stepmom came with its own rulebook, one that nobody handed you, you just had to fumble through it. Jamie, who I'd thought of as my little buddy, suddenly seemed to realize I was in his mom's spot. "Why do you always have to tell me what to do?" he'd challenge, his little face scrunched up in annoyance. "Because I care about you, Jamie. It's part of my job now," I'd explain, trying to keep my tone light, but firm. And then there were the everyday adjustments, the dance of a new marriage. Tom had his ways I hadn't noticed when I was just the housekeeper. Like how he insisted on having dinner at exactly 6, or how the furniture shouldn't be moved even an inch from where Laura had placed it. "Tessa, why did you move the couch?" he'd ask, his voice more of confusion than anger. "Just trying something new, mixing it up a bit," I'd reply, pushing the couch back reluctantly under his watchful eyes. "Let's keep it the original way. It's how Laura liked it," he'd say, and that was that. Laura's ghost hovered in the corners, her touch lingering in the arrangement of cushions and photo frames. A few months later, Tom asked me to come to work for the sake of an additional source of income. It was okay, but I was upset by the demanding tone of his voice. I got a job at a store nearby to keep up with cooking and cleaning the house. Family life has not turned out to be as easy as I once imagined it would be. A year into our marriage, I started feeling like a guest in what was supposed to be my home. Tom seemed to have rules that never came up when we were dating, like an invisible playbook I wasn't privy to. It all came to a head one afternoon when I decided to switch out the old rug in the bathroom. It was a simple change, nothing drastic, just a new rug to brighten up the space. But when Tom came home and saw it, you'd think I'd redecorated the whole apartment. "What's this?" He stood in the bathroom doorway, his brow furrowed as he pointed at the rug. "A new rug. The old one was getting moldy," I said, trying to keep my voice light, hoping to head off any drama. "Why didn't you ask me? You know how I feel about changing things around here." His tone was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. "I didn't think a rug would be a big deal, Tom." I felt my defenses rising. "Well, it is. I want things left the way they were." He was practically glaring at me now, and the intensity caught me off guard. That night at dinner, things went from bad to worse. Tom's younger son, Jamie, had been struggling at school, and somehow that was my fault too. "Jamie's grades are slipping. What's going on with his homework?" Tom asked, his eyes fixed on me across the table. "I've been busy, Tom. I started that job at the store, remember? You wanted me to help out with money," I replied, my voice tight with frustration. "So you're just going to let everything else slide?" He was accusatory now, his voice raising a notch. "I'm doing my best here," I shot back, feeling the weight of his expectations crushing me. "It doesn't seem good enough. The house is a mess, and you're not keeping up with Jamie like you used to. Laura would have handled it better." The mention of his late wife was a low blow, and it hit its mark. I was silent, the hurt too deep to respond. The rest of the meal passed in tense silence. The troubles didn't stop at Tom. Jamie, seeing how his father treated me, started pushing boundaries too. One evening, I caught him up late on his computer, way past his bedtime. "Jamie, it's late. You need to turn off the computer and go to bed," I said as calmly as I could. "You're not my mom. You can't tell me what to do." His voice was loud, challenging. "I'm not trying to be your mom, Jamie. But you have school tomorrow, and you need your rest." He scoffed, turning back to his screen. "Whatever, Dad," he yelled, calling for backup. Tom came in, his face set in a hard line. "Let him be, Tessa. He's fine. But he needs to sleep. It's not good for him to stay up so late. He's my son, I think I know what's best for him." Tom's tone was final, leaving no room for argument. Feeling undermined and disrespected, I retreated, the gap between us growing wider by the day. I started to feel like nothing more than a housekeeper, a nanny, someone who was there to cook and clean and then step out of the way. The day I got a bonus at work should have been a joyous occasion. With the extra money, I did something I hadn't done in a long while. I bought myself a new dress. It was nothing extravagant, just a simple, pretty thing that made me feel good when I tried it on. I was wearing the dress when I got home, a small smile playing on my lips as I imagined Tom's surprise. He noticed all right, but not the way I had hoped. "What's that?" he asked, his tone harsh as he eyed my new purchase. "It's just a dress, Tom. I bought it with my bonus," I said, twirling a little to show it off, trying to lighten the mood. "A bonus, huh? And you thought the best thing to spend it on was a dress?" His voice rose with each word. I stopped twirling, feeling the happiness drain out of me. I thought it was okay to treat myself. "Treat yourself?" Tom scoffed. "That money could have gone to something we actually needed. Like bills. Or saving up for something important." Before I could respond, Jamie chimed in from the doorway, his voice bitter. "Yeah, or maybe a new console that I've been asking for." I looked from Jamie to Tom, my heart sinking. It was my bonus. I just wanted something nice. The room filled with a heavy silence, Tom's eyes cold and unyielding, Jamie's stare accusing. That night, they both started treating me like I was invisible, not a word or a glance in my direction unless absolutely necessary. This silent treatment went on for a week. Meals passed in silence, my attempts at conversation met with cold shoulders and dismissive grunts. It was like I didn't exist in my own home. But life has a way of testing you with more than you think you can handle. A couple of years later, during the pandemic, my mother passed away. It was a sudden and heart-wrenching loss, leaving me to inherit the family house, a large, old structure, along with a significant sum of money. When I told Tom about the inheritance, his eyes lit up in a way that made me uncomfortable. "We'll move there," he declared one evening, looking over the property papers. "It's bigger, and the school near there is perfect for Jamie." I nodded, too drained from grieving to argue or to ponder his sudden interest in my inheritance. "Yes, maybe a new place will give us a fresh start," I said, hoping his intentions were as genuine as my wishes. "We'll start packing up this weekend," Tom decided, already making plans. Packing was a slow process, each item a memory, each box a step toward a new life I hoped would be better. As the moving day approached, I found myself observing Tom and Jamie, watching them discuss room arrangements and renovations for the new house. Their enthusiasm was hard to gauge. Was it for the new start or for what the new house represented? That morning, I wasn't feeling great, my head was pounding, and my stomach was in knots. The store manager noticed my pale face and sent me home early, something I was grateful for. I let myself in with my key, expecting the usual silence, but instead, I was met with low, conspiratorial voices drifting from Tom's makeshift office. Instinctively, I pressed myself against the wall by the door, my breath catching in my throat as I listened. "Yeah, Dad, thanks for setting that up. Leaving the apartment to me is a big help," said Mike, Tom's eldest son, his voice a mix of gratitude and scheming. "No problem, Mike. Once we move into Tessa's place, I'll have more than enough. We'll live there a bit, I'll spend her money, and then I'll find a good reason to divorce her. We'll split the assets, easy." Tom's voice was cold, calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. The pain of the betrayal was sharp, like a knife twisting in my gut. Mike laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Man, your new girlfriend is way hotter than Tessa. Can't wait for you to ditch that stupid chicken." I stood frozen, not wanting to alert them to my presence. After a few moments, I quietly backed away from the door, my mind racing. The initial shock was giving way to a burning, seething anger. I had to act, but I needed to be smart. I left the apartment as silently as I had entered and headed straight to the lawyer's office. The lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, was a sharp-eyed man who listened intently as I laid everything out. "This is more common than you'd think," he said, his voice even. "But you've got a good head on your shoulders, and we'll make sure you come out of this on top." I nodded, feeling a semblance of control returning. "What are the next steps?" I asked. "We file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and deception. Gather any evidence you can. Recordings, documents, anything that shows his intent. Mr. Reynolds advised. Thank you. I'll get everything ready, I said, standing up. The weight of the legal folder in my hand felt like a shield, something to protect me from the storm ahead. As I walked home, my mind was a whirl of plans and possibilities. When I returned home, Tom was in the kitchen, making dinner as if nothing had happened. Mike had left, and the normalcy of the scene was almost surreal. "Hey, you're back early. Feeling any better?" Tom asked, looking up from the stove. I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "A bit, yeah. Just tired," I said, keeping my voice light. "That's good. Dinner will be ready soon. Why don't you go lie down for a bit?" he suggested, turning back to his cooking. "Sure, I might just do that," I said, my voice sweet as syrup, but inside, I was steeling myself for the battle ahead. I went to our room, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed. The next few weeks would define the rest of my life. I wasn't just going to roll over and let Tom take everything from me, not without a fight. The morning of the move felt different. I had everything planned down to the last detail, and Tom had no clue about the storm that was about to hit him. I'd packed my personal belongings quietly over the past few weeks and had them moved to a new place in another city, a fresh start, a new me. This morning, I left the house as usual, a simple handbag in tow, telling Tom I was off to work early. "See you at the new house later," he called out nonchalantly, completely unaware of the bomb about to drop. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Sure, see you there," I lied smoothly, closing the door behind me with a soft click that marked the end of my old life. Meanwhile, Tom and Jamie were supposed to meet the movers at my inherited house and relocate our family there. What Tom didn't know was that there was no family to relocate anymore, and that house wasn't ours to call home any longer. I waited patiently in my new apartment, my heart racing as I pictured the scene unfolding at the old house. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone buzzed, a message from my neighbor who was keeping an eye out. "He's there, looks confused," it read. Tom must have been standing at the door, expecting to walk into his new life. Instead, he was greeted by strangers, the new owners of the house I had sold right from under him. I imagined his face, the confusion morphing into realization and then anger as he processed the betrayal. According to my neighbor, Tom knocked on the door, and a confused couple opened it, introducing themselves. "We just bought this place. Who are you?" they would have asked, just as baffled by the presence of a moving truck full of furniture. The movers, equally perplexed, started asking where to put the boxes, and Tom, flustered and furious, tried to call me. My phone lit up with his number, but I ignored it, sticking to the plan. When no answers came, he had no choice but to return to his apartment, where another surprise awaited him. Mike, his eldest son, had moved in his own furniture, and his fiancée was already unpacking. The apartment was no longer Tom's sanctuary but a crowded mess of broken plans and shattered expectations. "Get out! This is still my place!" Tom must have roared, the vein in his neck throbbing with rage. "Dad, we gave up the lease on our apartment. We've got nowhere to go," Mike shot back, defiant and desperate. Finally, I picked up the phone after his third, more frantic call. Tom's voice was livid, tinged with a betrayal he thought only he was capable of. "Tessa, what the hell do you think you're doing? Why are you ruining everything?" I took a deep breath, my voice calm and resolute. "I know about everything, Tom. The plans you made with Mike, the girlfriend, your charming little comments. I've sold the house and protected my assets. You won't use me anymore. You can't do this to me. We're married." His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "The divorce papers are in your mailbox," I replied firmly. "Consider this me looking out for myself. You'll also find that I will be asking for alimony." I didn't pick up his calls after that. My old phone, the one he knew the number to, would soon be turned off for good. I sat back, a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was free, truly free for the first time in what felt like forever. The courtroom was charged with tension. My ex-husband Tom sat across from me, his face a mask of fury and desperation. He was gunning for half of everything I owned, but I was armed with the truth, and a stellar lawyer. My lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, was a no-nonsense type who had every piece of evidence neatly organized and ready to dismantle Tom's claims. Your Honor, we have substantial proof of Mr. Wright's infidelity, and we intend to show that his demands for property share are not only baseless but also immoral, he stated confidently as the proceedings began. Tom's lawyer tried to paint a picture of a broken man wronged by his wife's sudden departure, but it fell flat as soon as Mr. Reynolds presented the evidence. Receipts from lavish dinners, hotel bookings for two, and love letters to another woman, every item displayed on the projector screen was another nail in the coffin of Tom's credibility. When it was time for testimonies, a couple of acquaintances from our old neighborhood took the stand. They didn't mince words. I saw him at the lake with her. They were all over each other like teenagers. One testified, her tone disgusted. Tom's lawyer tried to counter, arguing about the legitimacy and relevance of the evidence, but it was clear the judge wasn't buying it. The atmosphere was thick with Tom's silent rage, I could almost feel it across the room. Finally, the judge delivered her verdict. Given the evidence of infidelity and deception presented by the plaintiff, I find it impossible to grant any property claims to Mr. Wright. Furthermore, considering the income disparity, Mr. Wright is ordered to pay alimony. Tom's face went from red to white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. It was a sight I didn't enjoy, but it was justice, plain and simple. His mistress had left him once she realized there was no lavish lifestyle waiting for her, especially when she found out she'd have to share an apartment with his sons and his eldest son's fiancée. I'm not going to be a free housekeeper, she'd said, echoing the irony of my past with Tom. As for Tom, he ended up exactly where he put himself. His battles with his eldest son over space and responsibilities were the stuff of local gossip. Jamie, the younger one, turned into a defiant teenager, harder to handle every day without a steady maternal influence. Meanwhile, I was building a new life far from that chaos. I took up courses in graphic design, something I'd always had a knack for but never pursued. The community here was vibrant and supportive, helping me network and establish a small freelance business. I was happy starting over. Life as the eldest wasn't easy, especially with Claire as my little sister. From the get-go, she knew how to play her cards right. I guess you could say I was always in the background, just Elizabeth, the responsible one, and there was Claire, always ready to stir up trouble. It was Dad's 40th birthday, and Mom had gone all out with the decorations and made his favorite cake, cherry-topped with thick vanilla frosting. The whole family buzzed with excitement, and relatives were spilling in and out, filling the house with laughter and chatter. I was busy helping Mom in the kitchen, while Claire was probably plotting her next mischief. Liz, can you take this to the table? Mom said, handing me a tray of appetizers. When I walked into the living room, my heart sank. The right side of the cake was a mess, cherry toppings missing and frosting smeared. And there was Claire, an innocent look plastered on her face. It didn't take a genius to figure out what happened, but before I could say a word, Claire pointed at me. Liz did it. I saw her, Mom. I stood frozen, the accusation hitting me like a slap. What? No, I didn't. Why would I? Mom came rushing in, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Elizabeth, how could you? Apologize right now. But Mom, it wasn't me, I protested, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I don't want to hear it. Go to your room. You're grounded, young lady. I trudged upstairs, the injustice of it stinging more than any punishment could. Later, Claire crept into my room, a smug look hiding just under her feigned sympathy. Tough luck, sis. But hey, I can make it up to you, she whispered, pulling a crumpled $5 bill from her pocket. Take this and we're even. Even? You lied. Why should I cover for you? I was seething but curious about her confidence. Come on, Liz. It's easy money. Just grab that envelope in Dad's office I told you about earlier, and bring it to me. Easy peasy. Her plan was simple and tempting in a twisted way. The envelope was supposedly some paperwork she wanted to sneak a peek at, nothing more. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Sneaking the envelope to Claire felt wrong, but I was already painted the villain. What more did I have to lose? The next morning, the hammer dropped harder than I could have imagined. Dad was raging, the envelope in his hand. It wasn't just papers, it was cash. Cash meant for paying some of the bills. Elizabeth, how could you steal from us? Dad's voice boomed through the house. I didn't. It was. Save it. We found this in your room, he interrupted, his disappointment cutting deeper than the anger. Claire walked away scot-free, and I was left to stew in my room, grounded and betrayed. I vowed then never to let her sweet talk me into anything ever again. High school was a mixed bag for me, and while I buckled down on studies, Claire threw herself into every party she could find. As graduation neared, the gap between us grew wider. One evening, I was knee-deep in college application forms when Claire barged into my room, reeking of smoke and something sweet that I couldn't place. Her eyes were too bright, her smile too forced. Liz, you gotta loosen up. Why don't you come out with me tonight? There's a killer party down at Jake's place. You could use some fun, she cajoled, flicking her hair back in that carefree way she always did. I looked up from my papers, irritated. Claire, not everyone's idea of fun is getting wasted on a school night. Some of us have actual plans for the future. Claire's face hardened, and she leaned in close. Just watch, Liz. I'll make it big without any stupid degree. I don't need to waste my time like you do. Time passed, and our choices post-high school reflected our heated exchange that night. I got into college, moved to a city with a reputable landscape architecture program, and started carving out a niche for myself. Claire, true to her word, skipped college. Last I heard, she'd taken off to another city with a questionable crowd, chasing who knows what. Mom and Dad tried to bridge the gap between us, urging me to reach out to Claire. Elizabeth, have you heard from your sister recently? Mom would ask during our weekly calls, hope tinged with worry in her voice. No, Mom. Claire hasn't called. Did she reach out to you? I'd reply, knowing full well she hadn't. She's your only sister, Liz. Maybe you should try talking to her, mend things. Dad would chime in, his voice always a mix of frustration and concern. I sighed, feeling the old weight of being the responsible one. I'll try, Dad, but you know Claire. She does what she wants. While I built my academic and eventual professional credentials, Claire became a nomad of sorts. Her life a series of adventures and misadventures relayed through rare, cryptic social media updates that did more to mystify than inform. Then came the inheritance from Grandma, a blessing that felt like a lifeline. I poured that money into starting my own business, a landscape design firm. It was a dream come true, turning soil and seeds into serene escapes. Meanwhile, Claire's sporadic text showed pictures from beaches and bars, her wild, carefree existence a stark contrast to my structured days. My landscaping business was blooming, and I was deep in the green, literally and figuratively. With every shrub I planted and every garden I designed, I felt more anchored, more at home in my world. One busy Tuesday, as I was hauling bags of mulch across the nursery, I first met Michael. He came in wearing a plain white tee and jeans, a resume in hand, looking every bit out of place among the flora. Hi, are you Elizabeth? I'm Michael. Hear about the job? His voice was clear, his handshake firm. Yes, that's me. You're a bit early for your interview, but that's all right. Let's talk as we work. You can help me with these bags, I said, motioning towards the pile of mulch. We talked as we worked, his ease with physical labor apparent. He wasn't just some guy, he was someone who knew his way around a garden, his knowledge deep, not just fluff. His simplicity was refreshing. No airs about him, just a genuine love for the earth and what it could yield. By the time we finished setting up the new floral display, I was more than convinced about him. You're hired, Michael. Can you start tomorrow? His grin was as wide as the horizon. Absolutely, wouldn't miss it for the world. Over the next few months, Michael became more than just an assistant. He was a confidant, a co-conspirator in all things green and growing. Our lunch breaks often turned into brainstorming sessions, or just times to laugh over spilled seeds or a particularly stubborn patch of earth. It was during one of these lunch breaks that things shifted. We were sitting on an old wooden bench, sharing a pizza. "You know, Liz, I've been thinking," Michael started, his tone a bit more serious than usual. "Yeah? What about?" "If it's about that weedy patch by the fence, I'm all ears," I joked, trying to keep things light. He chuckled, then turned to me, his eyes steady. "No, not that. About us. I mean, I like working here, with you. A lot. And I was wondering if you maybe feel the same?" His words hung in the air, mingled with the scent of pine and fresh earth. It was one of those moments, the kind where everything seems to pause. "Michael, yeah, I do. I really enjoy having you around too," I admitted, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. "Good, that's good. So, do you think we could, go out sometime? Not as boss and employee, but just as us?" I laughed, more out of relief than anything. "I'd like that. Let's do it." "Great. It's a date then," he said, his smile making me feel like everything was just as it should be. A year later, we got married. It was a simple ceremony, just close friends and family in a small garden we both loved. Standing there with Michael, exchanging vows beneath the arch of blooming jasmine, I felt a sense of completeness. Just when you think you've got life somewhat figured out, it throws a curveball. Mine came in the form of an unexpected call from my mom. "Liz, guess who's back? Your sister Claire. She's here and wants to see you," Mom said, her voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. "We're having dinner tonight. You and Michael should come." That evening, Michael and I drove to my parents' house. The familiar landscape rolled by, but my stomach twisted with every mile closer to what felt like stepping back in time. Walking up to the door, Michael squeezed my hand. "You okay?" "Not really. But let's get this over with," I muttered, trying to plaster on a smile as we rang the bell. The door swung open, and there was Claire, as radiant and charming as ever, a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety I felt inside. "Liz, look at you, all successful and married," Claire exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt more for show than out of affection. "And you must be Michael. I've heard so much about you." Dinner was a lavish affair. Mom had pulled out all the stops, and Dad was unusually quiet, watching the interactions with a hopeful eye. Claire was in full charm mode, laughing a little too loudly at Michael's jokes and keeping the conversation dangerously close to the topic of my business. "So, Liz, how's the business going? Must be good, huh? Working with all those fancy clients and big projects," Claire said, a gleam in her eye that I didn't trust. "It's going all right, lots of hard work as usual," I replied, playing down the details. "Oh come on, don't be modest. Mom told me you landed some big contracts." "That's amazing. You must be making a killing," she pushed, her curiosity poorly veiled. I shrugged, trying to steer the conversation away. "It pays the bills. So, what have you been up to, Claire?" "It's been years. Oh, this and that. Travel, fun, living life, you know how it is," she said vaguely, waving her hand dismissively. Dad chimed in, possibly trying to smooth things over. "Claire's thinking of settling down here, starting fresh. It's a good thing, having both my girls in the same town." I forced a smile, catching Michael's wary glance from across the table. The evening dragged on, with Claire's questions about my business becoming more pointed and persistent. I felt like I was being interviewed rather than catching up with family. As we said our goodbyes, Claire pulled me aside. "Really, Liz, if you ever need a hand or want to talk shop, just give me a call. Family should stick together, right?" Her words, meant to comfort, felt more like a warning. As Michael and I drove home, the silence in the car was heavy. "Heads up, Liz. I don't trust her," There's something off about how she was digging into the business details, Michael finally said, breaking the silence. I know, I sighed, leaning back in my seat. Something's not right. But we'll figure it out. We always do. The day I won the City Park tender was supposed to be the best day of my career. It was a massive project, one that promised not just financial rewards, but a real stamp on the map for my business. I was buzzing with excitement when I called Michael. Hey, babe, guess what? We won. We actually won the tender. I almost shouted into the phone, unable to keep the thrill out of my voice. That's incredible, Liz. I knew you'd nail it. We need to celebrate. How about that concert tonight, and maybe a drink after? Michael's voice matched my excitement. The concert was everything we needed. The band was one of our favorites, a perfect backdrop to our celebratory mood. As the last song faded out and the crowd began to disperse, I realized I needed a quick bathroom break before heading out for drinks. I'll just run to the ladies' room. Meet you right here? I told Michael, pointing to a spot near the exit. When I stepped out, Michael was nowhere in sight. I scanned the crowd, my heart starting to race. Had he gone ahead? No, he wouldn't do that. I pulled out my phone to call him, but then I paused. Up ahead, on a dimly lit path, I saw him. But he wasn't alone. He was with someone, a woman. My pace quickened as I moved closer, trying to see who it was. Then, as they stepped into a patch of moonlight, my heart sank. It was Claire. What the hell? I ducked behind a tree, my mind racing. This couldn't be right. Not Claire. Not Michael. Yet there they were, laughing, too close, too intimate. Then, they kissed. It felt like a punch to the gut. I fought the urge to run out, to scream. Instead, I pulled out my phone, switched it to record, and edged closer. I could hear them now. Claire's voice, silky and mocking. So, the big contract finally came through. She's a bloody fool, isn't she? Thinking this was all her big break. Michael's reply was a low chuckle. Totally in the dark. Once the money's in her account, we can make our move. It'll be easy to transfer it out before she even notices. Mexico, here we come. Poor Liz, always so trusting. Just like when we were kids, huh? Claire was almost purring. They parted with another kiss, and Claire sauntered off, while Michael checked his phone. Panic flickered across his face when he saw the time. He turned and started back towards the concert venue, right towards where I was supposed to be waiting. I slipped the phone into my pocket and stepped out from behind the tree, my heart hammering. As I walked towards the exit, I spotted him looking around, a fake frown of concern on his face. Liz, there you are. I was getting worried, he said, reaching out to me. I looked up at him, keeping my face as neutral as possible. Sorry, got a bit turned around. Let's go have that drink, shall we? The walk to the bar was a blur. My mind was racing, piecing together months, no, years of lies. The tender, the late nights, the sudden trips Michael, it all made sense now. We sat at the bar, and Michael toasted to our success. To us, Liz. To our future. I forced a smile, my hand tight around the phone in my pocket. To us, I echoed, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. The morning after the concert, I was up early, troubled thoughts robbing me of sleep. Michael was still asleep, his breathing even and calm, unaware of the storm brewing just a few feet away. I slipped out of bed and headed to my home office. First, I logged into my company's bank account. What I found made my stomach turn. There were dozens of small transactions, siphoning off amounts just under the threshold that would trigger a notification. Then, I checked my personal account. The same pattern. Money, my money, leaking away like water through cracks. Michael had access to both accounts, he was the only other person who could have done this. I needed to act, but cautiously. If Michael suspected I was onto him, he might accelerate his plans, whatever they might be. I decided not to confront him, not yet. Instead, I phoned an old college friend who now worked as a forensic accountant. "Hey, Tom, it's Liz. I need a favor, a big one. Can you do a discreet audit of my accounts? Both personal and business. It's urgent." Tom's voice was grave when he replied. "Sure, Liz. I can start today. But what's going on? You sound serious." "Just problems. I'll explain later. Thanks, Tom." I hung up and sat back, my mind racing. For the next 2 weeks, I had to keep up appearances. The thought of acting normal around Michael twisted my gut, but I had no choice. 2 days later, Tom called me with the preliminary results. "Liz, it's not looking good. There are irregularities all over the place. It's like someone's been consistently skimming off the top. You were right to be suspicious." Hearing it so plainly hit hard. "Can you compile everything? I might need it soon." "Of course. I'll get everything organized. Liz, be careful, okay?" I promised I would, hanging up with a heavy heart. A couple of days later, I received an email from Tom. Armed with the audit results and the damning recording, I knew it was time to bring in heavier reinforcements. My hands were shaking as I dialed Mark, a classmate from high school who had since become a cop. "Mark, it's Liz. Elizabeth Miller. I need help, and it's pretty serious." There was a pause on the line before he responded, his voice cautious but concerned. "Liz? What's going on? Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. "No, not really. I've uncovered something. It's a long story, but it involves fraud, my husband, and my sister. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe away from prying eyes." I felt like a character in a bad crime drama as I laid out the documents and played the recording for him. Mark listened, his expression growing darker by the minute. "This is serious, Liz. Based on what you've shown me, and this recording, it's solid evidence. But catching them in the act would make it airtight. It could ensure they don't just wiggle out on a technicality." I nodded, the reality of the situation settling in. "What do you suggest?" "Keep things normal. Act like you don't suspect a thing. We need to catch them transferring the money or making a move against you." The next few days were a masterclass in acting. I smiled and nodded, played the doting wife and the oblivious sister. I saw the looks Michael and Claire exchanged, loaded with secrets and plans. A week later, the payment for the City Park project hit my company's account. It was a large sum, the largest I'd ever handled. I called Mark right away. "It's in. The money's in the account. They're going to make their move soon," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Good. From now on, we'll monitor the accounts closely. If they make a move, we'll be ready." I watched Michael that evening, observed him fiddling with his phone, probably checking the account, plotting his next steps. Later, in bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Michael's breathing. It was almost hard to believe that this man, the man I'd loved and trusted, was plotting against me. Meanwhile, Claire had orchestrated the farewell dinner under the pretense of celebrating a new chapter in her life. As I walked into my parents' house, the atmosphere was buoyant, almost surreal in its cheerfulness. "Liz, you made it." Claire greeted me with her typical flair, a wide grin plastered across her face. "I have some big news. I've met someone wonderful, and we're planning to get married. We're even talking about moving to a resort to live out our dream life." My parents beamed at her, their joy palpable. "Oh, Claire, that's wonderful. Tell us more about him." I sat quietly, forcing a smile as Claire wove a tale about her new, mysterious beau. Her descriptions were vague, deliberately skipping over any details that could link directly back to Michael. Just as Claire was elaborating on her fabricated love story, the front door burst open. Michael stormed in, his face flushed with anger and panic. "Liz, why can't I access any of the accounts? What the hell is going on?" he bellowed, his eyes wild. The room fell silent. My parents looked from Michael to me, confusion written all over their faces. Claire's facade slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of fear. I stood up, my voice calm but icy. Because, Michael, I know everything. I know about your plans with Claire. About the money, about the lies. I pulled out my phone and hit play. The recording of their conversation under the dim lights of the park filled the room. Claire's scheming words, Michael's complicit laughter, it all echoed off the walls, stark and undeniable. My parents turned pale, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. Michael and Claire made a move towards the door, a pathetic attempt to escape what was coming. At that moment, the police, led by Mark, entered the house. Michael Turner, Claire Miller, you are under arrest for attempted fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The officers handcuffed them. Michael's plea was pitiful. Liz, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Forgive me. I looked at him, at the man I once loved, and felt nothing but revulsion. There's nothing to forgive. You made your choice. After the police and the chaos had left, the house was painfully quiet. My father looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. Liz, we're so sorry. We should have seen it. All those years, blaming you. It's okay, Dad. It's over now, I said, though I knew the healing would take much longer than just tonight. The courtroom was cold, sterile. My heart was pounding as I sat there, waiting for the final verdict on Michael and Claire. I wasn't alone, my parents were there, it seemed they aged years in these past weeks. As the judge entered, everyone rose, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. We all sat down as he began to speak, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. The court hereby sentences both defendants to 5 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 3 years, based on behavior and restitution payments. The judge's words were like a physical relief, a burden lifting that I hadn't fully acknowledged I was carrying. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, the sight of the garden, lush and vibrant, was a stark contrast to the morning's events. I took a deep breath, the familiar sense grounding me. Why don't we have dinner together tonight? At home. Just us, I suggested, longing for the simplicity of a family meal. That sounds perfect, honey, Mom said, relief in her voice. As they went inside, I lingered in the garden, my sanctuary. I touched the leaves, the petals, reminding myself of the growth and life that continued, relentless and beautiful despite the harshness of the world. Hi, I'm Emily. Born to Ava, a once glamorous model, and Jake, a guy who knew his way around a camera, I was supposed to be their golden ticket to keep the lavish lifestyle they were scared of losing. Look at her, Jake. She's perfect. That face could relaunch my brand, Mom said, hovering over my crib with that calculating gleam in her eyes. I was too young to remember, of course, but she'd repeat that story like a broken record as if proud of her foresight. Dad, a man of few words, snapped photos, turning our home into a studio. Just one more, Ava. She's tired, he'd often mutter during those endless sessions. Nonsense. She's a natural, aren't you, baby? Mom's voice was sugary sweet when she wanted something. It worked on everyone, Dad included. Growing up, I hardly noticed the constant clicks of the camera or Mom's relentless ambition. It was just how things were. My playdates? More like photo ops, with Mom directing every pose. Smile more, Emily. No, not like that. Think princess, not playground. She'd instruct, eyes darting between me and the lens. I tried to please her. Always tried. Maybe because every flash of the camera was paired with her rare, gleaming approval, or maybe because I didn't know anything else. Dinner time was no different. We didn't talk about school or friends. It was always about branding, shoots, and Mom's new ideas to keep her followers hooked. Eating healthy is not just good, it's marketable, Emily. Remember, you are what you eat, and right now, you're my little star. Mom explained one evening, her words slow and deliberate as if trying to sell the concept to a potential sponsor hidden in the bushes. Dad, on the other hand, seemed to shrink with each passing day, his voice seldom rising above a whisper. "It's all good, Ava. Maybe we let her have some pizza tonight, eh? A cheat day," he'd suggest on rare occasions, a weak smile fleeting across his face. Her response was always sharp. "And ruin her complexion? You know better than to mess with the routine, Jake." Routine, my constant companion. I knew nothing of lazy Sundays or messy ice cream faces. Everything was curated, my childhood laid out like a magazine spread. One night, I heard them arguing. Their voices, usually hushed around me, echoed through the halls. "She's not just your ticket to fame, Ava. She's our daughter, not some prop." Dad's voice was tinged with frustration. "Oh, grow up, Jake. We're not in some fairy tale. This is real life, and in real life, we capitalize on what we have. Emily is what we have." Mom shot back, her words slicing through any pretense of maternal warmth. I lay in bed, clutching my bear, Mr. Snuggles, trying to make sense of it all. The idea that I was more useful than loved wasn't new, but hearing it spelled out cracked something inside me. The next morning, things went back to normal. Mom was all smiles, pretending last night never happened. Dad avoided my eyes, his usual. "Ready for your shoot, sweetheart?" Mom chirped as she straightened my dress. Her hands felt cold, her smile too stretched. And so, we continued, the camera capturing smiles that never quite reached my eyes, in a house that felt more like a set every day. I played my part, the golden child, not yet understanding the shadows that played behind the scenes of our picture-perfect life. Grandma and Grandpa, they saw through it all. They'd visit, shaking their heads, whispering about how kids needed dirt and sun, not spotlights and scripts. "Can't she just be a kid, Ava?" Grandpa would grumble as soon as he stepped through the door, his brows furrowed in disapproval. Mom would force a smile, her patience thin. "Dad, times have changed. Emily's opportunities are golden. We're setting her up for life." I'd watch from the corner, clutching a doll I wasn't allowed to dirty. Their visits were my only break from the constant clicks of Dad's camera. He'd put it down then, his face softening. "Let's all just relax for the evening. How about a movie, everyone?" Dad would suggest, his voice almost a plea. Mom's eyes would narrow, her lips pursed. "Sure, after Emily finishes her shoot with the new organic juice line. It's just a few photos, then we can all relax, as you put it." The shoots weren't quick. They never were. Dad tried to keep things light, goofy faces behind the camera, to make me giggle on cue. "Come on, pumpkin, show me the biggest smile. Think about, oh, ice cream." He'd cheer, hoping to catch a genuine moment. Mom didn't do patience. "Jake, focus. We need these perfect. The company is watching closely. They want the natural, happy child, not some sugared-up toddler." The arguments got more heated when the camera was off. Grandma and Grandpa would try to steal me away for a weekend, desperate to give me a taste of normal. "Ava, she should come stay with us. Just a few days. Let her run around, play in the mud." Grandpa would argue as he put on his coat, ready to leave but not ready to give up. "And what? Miss a casting call? No, Dad. We're not risking opportunities. She's fine." Mom would snap, her words final. It wasn't all bad. Sometimes, in the quiet mornings before Mom woke up, Dad would make pancakes, drizzling extra syrup and letting me toss in handfuls of chocolate chips. "Don't tell your mom." He'd wink, the secret sweet between us. "Promise." I'd giggle, the syrup sticky on my fingers, the moment light and free. But freedom was always fleeting. As soon as Mom's footsteps echoed down the hall, it was back to business. Hair brushed, face washed, and dressed in whatever outfit she'd laid out. In those days, I didn't understand the weight of sacrifice or the price of the path laid out before me. I only knew the routine, the constant push, and the clear understanding that my childhood wasn't really my own. It belonged to the brand, the image, the unspoken sacrifice of what could have been. When the sickness hit, it came without warning. One day, I was posing for a yogurt ad, all grins and giggles. The next, I was burning up, my body a battleground. Mom panicked, but not in the way you'd hope. Her first thought wasn't about getting me to a doctor, it was about how many shoots we'd have to cancel. "Ava, we need to get her to the hospital, now." Dad was pacing, his voice edged with a panic I'd rarely heard from him. "Just a minute, Jake. Let me think." Mom snapped back, her phone in one hand, probably scrolling through her calendar. "Think? She's burning up, Ava. This isn't about your bloody schedule." Dad's shout would have scared me if I weren't so out of it. In the hospital, they said it was polio. I didn't really understand then what it meant, only that it was bad, really bad. Mom's face went white when the doctor explained. "But she's been so healthy," Mom muttered to herself more than anyone else, her face twisted in confusion and anger. "Mrs. Dawson, Emily wasn't vaccinated against polio. It's extremely rare nowadays because most children are vaccinated," the doctor explained gently, a look of sympathy across his face. Dad looked like he'd been punched. "Not vaccinated? Ava, what, why?" Mom's lips thinned, her usual defense rising quick. "Don't you start on me, Jake. It was a choice we made." I was moved to a room, wires and tubes hooking me to machines that beeped and blinked. Days turned into weeks. I missed the sun, my sketches, even the annoying flash of Dad's camera. Mom rarely stayed long. She'd come in, sit for a bit, her foot tapping relentless on the sterile tiles. "Emily, you need to fight this. You know how much is riding on you getting better," she'd say, her voice tight, like she was negotiating a deal instead of comforting her daughter. More than anything, I wanted all of this to be just a bad dream, to wake up in my bed with Mr. Snuggles tight in my arms, ready for another day of pretend. But the nightmare was real, and it wasn't just the sickness. It was seeing the strain on Dad's face, hearing the impatience in Mom's voice, feeling the distance grow between who I was and who I was supposed to be. "Can't you just sit with her?" Dad's voice would rise sometimes when he thought I was sleeping. "She's scared, Ava. She needs us. She needs to get better. Sitting and coddling isn't going to fix her, Jake." Mom's reply, always sharp, like a slap. Days blurred together, each one a repeat of the last, beeps, whispers, and the heavy weight of knowing that to Mom, I was a project failing to meet its deadline. 2 years of my life blurred into a continuous loop of bed sheets, window views, and the ceaseless ticking of the clock. Bedridden, I became a fixture in my own home, an inconvenient piece of furniture rather than a daughter. Mom's irritation grew with each passing day, her frustration palpable every time she had to tend to me. Changing my diapers or washing me, she did it all with a grimace. "This is not what I signed up for," she'd mutter under her breath, her hands rough, her care lacking warmth. Dad tried to compensate. Every evening, he'd come into my room with a fairy tale book in hand, his voice a soft echo of better times. "Let's escape to a kingdom far away, Emily," he'd whisper, trying to lift my spirits as we dived into stories of brave heroes and far-off lands. But the daylight hours were long and lonely. Left to myself, I found solace in drawing. My sketches became my silent rebellion, my hidden diary. Crayons and pencils were my companions, crafting scenes far different from the sterile room I was confined to. I heard Mom's complaints, her selfish frustrations. She was tired of wearing the same outfits to parties because the money had dried up. "I'm stuck in last season's wardrobe while you lie around," she'd yell, her voice echoing off the walls, filled with a bitterness that cut deeper than the loneliness. Grandma and Grandpa saw the toll it was taking on me. They'd visit, laden with worry, their faces etched with concern. "Let her come stay with us for a while," Grandpa would suggest, his voice a gentle plea. "She needs a change of scenery, needs to feel loved." But Mom would have none of it. Absolutely not. What would people think if they knew I'd shipped her off to her grandparents? My image as a mother is at stake. Her voice was shrill, tinged with desperation. Her tantrums became more frequent, a testament to the crumbling facade of her once glamorous life. Dad's response was to retreat further into his shell, the bottle his only solace. Nights were filled with the sounds of Mom's crying fits and the clinking of Dad's glass. When I turned 8, a flicker of hope emerged as I began to slowly pull myself upright, leaning heavily on the bedpost. But one leg didn't cooperate. It was thinner, shorter, a lasting reminder of the illness that had ravaged my body. Mom dragged me to countless doctors, her face etched with a mix of hope and fear. "Is there nothing you can do?" she would demand, her tone sharp as she addressed the specialists. "I'm sorry, but these are post-polio complications. There's not much we can do to reverse this," the doctors would explain, their faces somber. The realization that I would never again be the perfect model child hit her like a storm. Rage replaced her initial shock. At home, she turned that rage on me. "Look what you've done to yourself," she'd scream. "If you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened. You've ruined everything." Her words stung, and I'd retreat further into my sketches, my only escape from her relentless blame. My drawings became darker, a mirror to the turmoil inside me. Yet, they also held a strange beauty, a testament to my endurance and my spirit, which refused to be crushed. Nights in my room were long and silent, filled only with the scratching of my pencils against paper as I lost myself in drawing worlds far kinder than my own. My comics became my sanctuary, a place where I was the hero, not the victim. "Why do you even bother with that stuff?" Mom's harsh voice would slice through the quiet as she barged into my room. "It's not like it's going to get us back on track. You should be focusing on something useful." I learned to just nod, not trusting my voice. My drawings hid under my bed, my fears and dreams bleeding onto the pages in secret. I had no friends to call, no schoolmates to lean on, my world was confined to these four walls. And the only connection I had to the outside was through my online classes and occasional, whispered phone calls with my grandparents who seemed to be the only ones who cared. One night, something changed. It was late, and the house was quiet, too quiet. That's when I heard it, muffled screams from downstairs. Heart pounding, I limped to my door, easing it open just enough to peek through. "I can't do this anymore, Jake. Look at her, look at what she's become." Mom's voice was frantic, laced with disgust. "I can't stand to look at her anymore." Dad's response was slurred, tired. "She's still our daughter, Ava. We can't just throw her away." "That's exactly what we're going to do," she snapped back. "Here, give her this and make it look like she ran away. Maybe some robber will do us a favor tonight and get rid of the geek." Dad's steps were heavy, his presence larger as he approached my room. The door creaked open, and there he stood, a silhouette of the man he once was, his eyes sad, his breath heavy with alcohol. "We're going for a drive, Em," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I could only nod, my whole body trembling as I followed him out to the car. We ended up in a part of town that even nightmares would hesitate to visit. Dad stopped the car, and his next words were barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I don't know what else to do." He handed me the phone, his hands shaking. "Keep this with you. Please forgive me." Then he left, just like that. I stood there, alone, the cold biting through my thin pajamas. My hands clutched the phone like a lifeline as sounds of distant fights filled the air. But they made one mistake, they left the SIM card in the phone. Shaking, I dialed Grandpa's number. "Grandpa, please, you have to help me. I'm scared. I don't know where I am." "Hold on, Emily. We're coming. Just stay hidden and keep the phone on." Grandpa's voice was firm, a promise in the dark. I hid behind a trash can, my body shaking from fear and cold, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Every noise made my heart jump, every shadow a monster in the dim street light. Finally, headlights swept around the corner, and Grandpa's car came into view. They had never driven so fast, and never had I felt so relieved to see them. Grandpa and Grandma rushed out, their arms wide open. After they rescued me, Grandpa and Grandma drove straight to Mom and Dad's house. They were furious, their anger crackling through the air like electricity. I stayed in the car, but I could hear the raised voices even from the driveway. "You've gone too far this time, Ava." Grandpa's voice boomed. "Please don't tell anyone," Mom pleaded, her voice cracking with fear. "Think about what they'll do to us." Grandma was relentless. "You're not fit to be her mother. You're signing over custody, Ava. Today." And just like that, they secured my freedom. Mom signed the papers, her tears of fear a far cry from repentance. Dad was silent, his head bowed, the fight gone out of him. Life at Grandma and Grandpa's was peaceful. They had a small, cozy house with a big backyard and a garden that seemed enchanted, bursting with colors and life. Grandpa taught me how to plant flowers, his rough hands gentle on the earth. "Plants gotta be nurtured, just like people," he'd say, a smile tucked into his beard. Grandma was a whirlwind of love and baked goods. She always had a new recipe to try, and the kitchen was our laboratory. "Sugar fixes a lot of things, especially moods," she'd wink, passing me a spoonful of cookie dough. I started going to a regular school not long after moving in. I was nervous, limping distinctly, self-conscious about my leg. But to my surprise, the kids were kind. They didn't stare or whisper like I'd feared. Instead, they were curious, accepting. "Want to play with us?" a girl named Lucy asked during recess one day. "Sure," I replied, a grin breaking over my face, surprised by the simplicity of the moment, how easy it felt to just be a kid among others. Art class became my refuge, where I truly flourished. Mr. Hernandez, the art teacher, noticed my talent right away. "You've got a real gift, Emily. Ever thought about showing your work to the world?" he encouraged. Taking his advice, I started posting my drawings online. It was just a few sketches at first, but soon, I had followers, a community of people who didn't just see the drawings, they saw me. They understood the stories I was telling through my art. Evenings at home were my favorite time. After dinner, we'd sit on the porch, Grandpa with his pipe and Grandma with her knitting, the day winding down around us like a soft blanket. "Life's good, isn't it?" Grandpa would ask, looking out at the garden bathed in twilight. "It's wonderful," I'd answer, leaning against Grandma, feeling safe and loved in a way I hadn't known was possible. At 19, life threw me into a new chapter, art school, with a scholarship that recognized my talents. The girl who once sketched in secret was now a known name in the online art community. Even my characters jumped off the pages, finding their way onto comic book covers and city walls as graffiti. Enrolling in art school was a dream realized. It was my chance to dive deeper, to explore the roots of artistic expression through classical training. "You're going to rock this, Emily," Grandpa said on the day I received my acceptance letter, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Yeah, kid, show 'em how it's done," Grandma added, always quick to throw in her fiery support. The campus was buzzing with creativity, a place pulsing with potential. My first day felt like stepping into a larger world, one I was eager to explore and influence. Studying was intense, but fulfilling. I absorbed techniques and histories that made my work richer, more grounded. My professors encouraged experimentation, leading me to blend traditional methods with my unique style. "You have a rare gift, Emily. Your perspective is refreshing," Professor Ames noted during a critique, his words bolstering my confidence. Parallel to my studies, I organized an exhibition of my paintings. It wasn't just an exhibition, it was a narrative display, telling stories of overcoming and becoming. "Each piece tells a story, doesn't it?" a visitor remarked during the opening night, her eyes tracing the lines of my largest canvas. "Absolutely. Each stroke has a part of my journey," I explained, finding joy in sharing my vision. The local media caught wind of my story, intrigued by the artist who conquered personal and physical challenges to create. They filmed reports at the exhibition, interviewing me about my work and life. "Emily Dawson isn't just an artist, she's a phenomenon," one reporter said as the camera light blinked red. I walked through the exhibition, my special shoes, and sometimes a cane aiding my steps. I wasn't hiding my limp, I was owning it. "You turn adversity into art," an art enthusiast commented, pointing at my cane, which I'd painted in bright colors. Photos of me appeared in fashion magazines again, a full circle moment. But this time, I posed because I wanted to, each photo a testament to my agency and artistry. "She redefines beauty," read the caption under a photo of me, my painted cane in hand, standing boldly beside one of my vibrant murals. By the time I finished my degree, I wasn't just a graduate with honors, I was a symbol of perseverance, a living canvas of my own making. And as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, cane in hand, the applause wasn't just for my academic achievement but for the journey that brought me there. The art gallery buzzed with chatter and the click of cameras, the air electric with admiration for the work lining the walls. I mingled with guests, my heart swollen with pride and nerves. It was a big day, the culmination of years of hard work and passion. The space was filled with my paintings, each piece a chapter of my life, a battle fought and won. Out of nowhere, the atmosphere shifted. My heart stopped for a second when I saw them, my parents. They have changed a lot. Dad looked worn, more lines on his face, his eyes dimmer. Mom's beauty disappeared, revealing her true self. I watched, frozen, as Mom made her way to the reporters who were filming. With the flair of someone used to the spotlight, she announced loudly, "I'm Emily's mother, and I'm just so overwhelmed with pride for what she's accomplished." The camera swung to her, eating up her performance. She's always been incredibly talented, and seeing all she's achieved, it's a mother's dream come true. I couldn't take it. My body moved on its own, fueled by a mix of anger and disbelief. "No," I interrupted sharply, my voice slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "I owe everything to my grandparents. They are the reason I am who I am today." Away from the prying eyes and lenses of the media, I pulled my parents aside, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mom's act dropped as soon as we were out of earshot, her eyes cold and calculating. "Emily, darling, we need your help," she began, the sweetness in her voice sickening. "Your father has had some troubles, he's lost his job, and we've had to sell the house. We have nowhere to go. You owe us, Emily." "I owed you nothing the moment you left me on that street," I shot back, my resolve hard as steel. "If you ever come near me or my grandparents, I'll go to the police." "Don't think I won't." They knew I meant every word. Without another word, they turned and left, disappearing back into the shadows from which they had emerged. That night, after the guests had left and the lights in the gallery dimmed, I took a moment to walk through the quiet space. My paintings looked back at me, each one a testament to my journey. I had faced my past, confronted the pain, and came out the other side stronger. Back home, in the quiet comfort of Grandma and Grandpa's house, I finally felt at peace. Here, in this house filled with love and acceptance, I knew I was home, truly home. I had my doubts about the day from the moment I woke up. The sky was gray, typical for late autumn, and there was a chill in the air that seemed to seep through the windows. I was scheduled to interview the state governor, an opportunity any journalist would kill for, and yet, I was uneasy. Maybe it was the weight of responsibility, or the fact that my little Ellie had woken up with a slight fever. Either way, the day felt off. I dropped Ellie off at my mom's place, giving her a quick kiss on the forehead before heading to the governor's office. My mom, always the worrier, said, "Make sure you watch yourself around those politicians. They're all smiles and handshakes until they're not." At the governor's office, I was met by his assistant, a man named Tom. He was a bit older than me, probably edging into his early 40s, with a sharp suit and a smile that managed to be both professional and warm. "Clara, right? Heard a lot about you. All good, promise," he said, extending his hand. "Yeah, that's me. And you're Tom? I appreciate the help setting this up," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, confident. The interview itself went better than expected. The governor was forthcoming, even charming, and I got some good quotes that I knew would make my editor happy. But it was Tom who caught my attention. He lingered nearby, always watching, making sure everything was in order. After the interview, while I was packing up my recorder and notes, Tom came over. "You got plans after this?" "There's a decent coffee place just around the corner. Their espresso will knock your socks off." I hesitated for a moment. It wasn't like me to mix work with anything personal, but there was something about Tom's straightforward manner that was disarming. "Sure, why not? I could use a good coffee after this," I replied. At the coffee shop, the conversation flowed easily. Tom talked about his daughter Amy, who was about to graduate high school and had plans for college. "She's got her mother's brains. Smart as a whip. I just try to keep up," he laughed. "I know the feeling. My Ellie's only 6, and she already outsmarts me daily," I said, laughing along. We talked more about our kids than anything else. It was refreshing to have a conversation that wasn't just about work or politics. Tom's demeanor was relaxed, and he didn't push the conversation in any direction it didn't naturally want to go. It was like talking to an old friend. As we left the coffee shop, Tom said, "Listen, Clara, I know you're not looking for anything serious." "Heck, I'm not either. But I liked this, talking, laughing. How about we do this again? No pressure, no expectations." I looked at him, really looked. He was sincere, that much was clear. "Yeah, I'd like that," I admitted, a bit surprised at my own readiness to dive back into something personal. There I was, 2 years into what started as a not-a-date routine with Tom, and suddenly I found myself staring at a small, shiny ring, feeling like the world had stopped spinning for just a second. We were at our favorite little Italian place, tucked away in a corner booth that had become our spot. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced around Tom's serious expression. He just popped the question, simple and straight, no fluff. "Clara, I'm not good with fancy speeches. So, how about it? Will you marry me?" Looking into his hopeful eyes, all I managed was, "Are you sure? Because, you know, life with me is a 3-ring circus." Tom laughed, that deep, reassuring sound that had first drawn me to him. "I'm counting on it. Ellie's a part of the deal, right? Wouldn't have it any other way." "Okay then, yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Yes, I'll marry you." Tom's place was bigger, with a yard that seemed to stretch forever and rooms that echoed with the potential of new memories. The first evening we spent there, Tom cooked dinner, something he'd become famous for during our not-a-date dates. Ellie watched him like a hawk, her curiosity barely contained. "Tom, are you sure you know how to cook? Mom usually burns the pasta," she stated matter-of-factly, standing on tiptoe to peer over the counter. Tom winked at her, tossing vegetables in a pan with a chef's flair. "I promise I won't burn anything." Scout's honor. The transition wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. Ellie and I were used to it being just the two of us against the world. Now, Tom was in the mix, with his easy smiles and a way of making even the hardest day seem manageable. We were learning to be a family, and not just any family, a good one, a real one. Life in Tom's house was starting to feel more like home every day, but there was still one piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit, his daughter, Amy. She was in college in another city, and we didn't see her much. The few times we did, the air felt charged, like a storm was always about to break. Amy came home for Thanksgiving, and I wanted everything to be perfect, to maybe smooth out some of the awkwardness that seemed to cling to the walls whenever she was around. I was in the kitchen when she walked in, her bags dropping to the floor with a thud. "Hey, Amy, good to see you. Let me help with that," I offered, moving towards her. She gave me a half-smile, more out of politeness than warmth. "Thanks, Clara. I've got it." Tom was all smiles, ruffling her hair like she was still 10 years old. "Kiddo, your mom sent some of that pumpkin pie you love. Bet you missed real food at college, huh?" Amy rolled her eyes, but there was a small smile there that didn't reach her eyes. "Sure, Dad. College food is the worst." Dinner was a quiet affair, with Ellie trying to fill the silence with chatter about her school projects and the new friends she had made. Amy nodded and made the right noises, but spent more time pushing her food around the plate than eating it. After dinner, I caught her in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "Amy, can we chat? I feel like we never really got off on the right foot here," I ventured, keeping my tone light. She looked up, her expression guarded. "We're fine, Clara. There's no issue to fix." I took a deep breath, choosing my words. "I know it's weird, me being here and all. I'm not trying to replace anyone or step on toes. I just want us to be okay, you know?" Amy put her phone down, her face softening a bit. "I get it. It's not you. It's weird seeing him move on, I guess." "I understand. Just know I'm here, alright? For you, too," I replied, hoping to bridge the gap between us. She nodded, a bit of the ice melting. "Thanks, Clara. I'll try to be less of a hermit, okay?" It was a start, and I'd take it. The weekend passed quicker than I wanted, and soon it was time for Amy to head back to college. She hugged her dad, gave Ellie a high five, and to my surprise, she turned to hug me too. It was quick and a bit awkward, but it was something. "Take care, Amy. Keep in touch, okay?" I said, feeling like we'd turned a corner. Ellie, who had been unusually quiet, tugged at my hand. "Is Amy mad at me? She doesn't talk much." I knelt down to her level, smoothing back her hair. "No, sweetie, she's not mad. She's just used to being on her own. We'll keep trying, okay?" Navigating new family dynamics was never going to be easy, but I believed in us. With patience and a lot of open hearts, I hoped we'd find our way to being not just a family by name, but one in spirit too. My job as a journalist meant erratic hours and sudden trips out of town, but Tom had stepped up in ways I hadn't even dared to hope for. He picked Ellie up from school, made dinner, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the rhythm of our new life together. Initially, Ellie was thrilled, always chattering about her day on the ride home, eager to show off the little projects she'd done in class. "She's really taken to you, Tom," I told him one evening, watching them assemble a puzzle on the living room floor. He looked up, a smile creasing his eyes. "She's a great kid, Clara. Couldn't ask for a better stepdaughter." But a few months in, I noticed a shift in Ellie. She became quieter, more reserved. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a skittishness that set alarm bells ringing in my mind. I tried to coax her into talking, to share what was on her mind, but she just shrugged and forced a smile. "It's nothing, Mom. Just tired, I guess," she'd say, but the mother in me knew better. Something was off. Then one night, as we were getting ready for bed, I noticed a bruise on her arm, a nasty, purple shadow that made my heart stop. "Ellie, what happened?" I asked gently, trying not to sound as panicked as I felt. She avoided my gaze, fiddling with the hem of her pajama top. "I fell down at school. It was silly. I wasn't looking where I was going." But the bruise looked like it had a story that didn't involve a simple fall. My mind raced with dark thoughts of bullying. "Did someone do this to you at school? You can tell me, Ellie." She shook her head quickly, too quickly. "No, Mom. It was just me being clumsy. Really." The next day, I dropped by her school and spoke with her teacher, Mrs. Jennings, a kind woman who had always been open about classroom dynamics. "Mrs. Jennings, has Ellie been having any trouble with other kids? Any signs of bullying?" Mrs. Jennings looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, no, Clara. Ellie gets along well with everyone. She's a quiet child, but she's not having any problems with other children that I've noticed." That left me more unsettled. If school was fine, then what was causing Ellie's change in behavior and the mysterious bruise? My mind churned with possibilities, none of them good. Determined to get to the bottom of things, I decided to buy a smartwatch that could record audio. I told myself it was for Ellie's safety, that I wasn't invading her privacy but protecting her. When I gave her the watch, her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. Wow, a smartwatch? For me? Ellie's voice was filled with excitement. Yep, you can wear it to school and everywhere. Think of it as an early birthday gift, I explained, trying to keep my voice cheerful. I watched her strap the watch to her wrist, her fingers fumbling with excitement. My heart was heavy with mixed feelings as she admired it. I hoped the watch would provide answers, that it was just my overactive imagination at work and nothing more. The routine with the smartwatch started off innocent enough. For days, all I heard were snippets of school lessons and the mundane chit-chat of children's lives. Ellie seemed happier at school, laughing and interacting freely, which was a stark contrast to her quiet demeanor at home. It gave me some peace of mind, hearing her like that. But that peace was shattered one busy afternoon at work. I had stepped out for a quick lunch at my desk, popping in my earbuds to listen to the latest recordings from Ellie's watch. It was a habit now, checking in on her world, making sure she was okay. That day, however, I was met with something that stopped me cold. Tom's voice boomed through the tiny speakers, harsh and cruel. "You're such a fool, Ellie. Why can't you ever listen?" His words were sharp, each one a dagger. The reply was a small, stifled sob, unmistakably Ellie's. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Then the sound, a sharp slap, the kind of sound that echoes long after it's over, followed by Ellie's crying. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. My heart raced, anger and shock warring inside me. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding. This was my worst fear laid bare. I sat frozen, my lunch forgotten, as the world continued bustling around me. I couldn't think straight. All I knew was I needed to get to Ellie, to hold her, to get her away from him. I rushed home, my mind racing, planning, dreading. When I arrived, Ellie was there, alone, sitting quietly in her room. Seeing her like that, so small, so vulnerable, it broke something inside me. "Ellie, baby, we need to talk," I said gently, sitting beside her on the bed. She looked up, her eyes wide and scared. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I know about Tom, about how he's been treating you. You don't have to be scared anymore." I heard everything. The floodgates opened then, and she poured out everything. The threats, the hits, how he'd made her promise not to tell me, how scared she was that it was somehow her fault. My heart ached with every word. I packed a few things quickly and drove her to my parents' house. They were horrified when I told them everything, and they didn't hesitate to take us in. "Stay here tonight," my mom said, her voice firm with that maternal resolve. "We'll take care of Ellie. You go sort this out." I hugged Ellie goodbye, her small arms clinging to me a moment longer than usual. "I'll fix this, I promise," I whispered, kissing her forehead. Leaving her there, safe with my parents, I drove back home. The house seemed darker, colder. I sat on the couch, the silence oppressive, waiting for Tom to come home. My mind raced with what I would say, how I would confront him. Anger, fear, betrayal, it all swirled inside me, a storm waiting to break. The sound of the front door opening and Tom's cheerful whistling sliced through the tense silence of the living room where I was waiting. He came in, all smiles, utterly unaware of the storm that was about to break. "Hey, babe, what's for dinner?" His voice rang through the house, light and carefree. I stood up, my stomach churning with nerves and anger. "We need to talk. Now," I said, my voice steely and calm. The smile faltered on his face. "Sure, what's up? You look serious." "It's about Ellie," I began, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What about her? Is she okay?" He took a step towards me, his brow creased. I cut him off, the fury building inside me. "No, Tom, she's not okay. Because of you." He stopped, his face a mask of bewilderment. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the abuse, Tom. I know how you've been treating her when I'm not around." The words felt like bullets, each one harder to say than the last. For a moment, he just stared at me, and then he laughed. A cold, harsh sound that echoed mockingly around the room. You're being ridiculous. You have no proof. You think you can take me down? With what? Your overactive imagination? His arrogance boiled my blood. I have more than enough proof, Tom. He smirked, stepping closer. Come on, Clara. You and I both know you're bluffing. If you push this, I'll make sure you regret it. I can destroy your career, drag your name through the mud. Don't forget, I have connections that you can't even dream of. The threat hung in the air, heavy and sinister. But I was ready for him. I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording of his tirade against Ellie. His voice filled the room, cruel and unmistakable. Tom's face went white, his confident demeanor crumbling as the reality of his situation dawned on him. Clara, please, I was just stressed, I didn't mean. Save it, Tom. I'm done listening to your excuses. I watched as he sank to his knees, his face crumpled in fear. Clara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, I can change. Don't do this. Don't ruin my career and my life. You should have thought about that before you hurt our daughter. You're not getting away with it this time. I stood firm, despite the part of my heart that ached to see him so broken. But I had to be strong, for Ellie. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I walked past Tom, still kneeling on the floor, and opened the door to 2 police officers. I had called them before Tom got home, the final step in ensuring my daughter's safety. Officers, thank you for coming. He's in here, I said, leading them into the living room. Tom looked up, the fear apparent in his eyes as the officers read him his rights and handcuffed him. He muttered pleas for forgiveness as they led him away, but I felt nothing but a hollow relief. Ellie was safe now, and that was all that mattered. After the door closed behind them, the silence was deafening. I sank down onto the couch, the adrenaline fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I knew this was only the beginning of a long battle, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. Ellie was safe, and Tom would face the consequences of his actions. It wasn't long before the news exploded, splashing across every headline and becoming the talk of the town. But nothing prepared me for the knock on my door early one morning, just as the chaos was unfolding. I opened the door to find my first husband, Michael, the father of Ellie, standing there, his face etched with concern and a hint of anger. Beside him stood his lawyer, a sharply dressed man known for his ruthless courtroom tactics, his reputation preceding him. Clara, we need to talk, Michael said without wasting a moment, pushing past the formalities as his lawyer followed suit. I sighed, stepping aside to let them in. I guess we do. Once we were all seated in the living room, his lawyer, Mr. Davidson, wasted no time. Clara, Michael here is very concerned about the welfare of Ellie and how this scandal could affect her. We want to ensure that her interests are protected, legally and financially. Michael chimed in, his voice firm. Clara, I won't let our daughter be dragged through the mud because of him. What were you thinking, getting involved with a guy like that? I bristled at his tone, my own anger rising. I was thinking that I found someone decent, which he seemed to be, until he wasn't. I'm handling it, Michael. As we debated back and forth, my phone buzzed. It was Amy, Tom's daughter, a message filled with urgency. I have something you need to see. Can we meet? I excused myself and stepped outside to call her. Amy, what's going on? Clara, I've got evidence. Evidence of what he did, not just to Ellie, but to me too, when I was younger. I'm ready to stand with you in court. Amy's voice was resolute, a stark contrast to the young woman who'd been so unsure before. Thank you, Amy. This means a lot. Let's bring this to light, all of it, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. Back inside, I relayed the news to Michael and Mr. Davidson. Looks like we'll have more than just our word against his. We have evidence, solid evidence, and his own daughter's testimony. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right, Clara. We'll support you in this, all the way. Just make sure it's handled with Ellie's best interest at heart. The court date was a spectacle, with reporters swarming the courthouse. Amy took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted years of hidden abuse. The evidence she provided was undeniable, the impact on the courtroom palpable. When the judge finally passed the sentence, it was more than I had dared to hope for. Tom was found guilty of child abuse and domestic violence. The judge awarded a significant fine in favor of both me and Amy, and Tom was sentenced to prison. His political career, his reputation, everything crumbled in the wake of his actions. The fresh start was exactly what Ellie and I needed. After everything that happened, buying a new house felt like claiming back a piece of ourselves that had been lost in the chaos. The house was smaller, cozier, a place where the shadows of our past couldn't reach us. Moving day was a mix of laughter and hard work, with boxes labeled Ellie's stuff outnumbering everything else. "Mom, can I paint my room purple this time?" Ellie asked, her eyes sparkling with the sort of excitement that had been missing for too long. "Sure thing, kiddo. Whatever you want," I replied, grateful to see her so happy, so full of life again. We spent that first night on the living room floor, surrounded by boxes, eating pizza, and planning out what we'd do with each room. It was perfect, just the two of us, and yet, there was a new addition to our little family dynamic that I hadn't anticipated. Amy, Tom's daughter, had become a fixture in our lives. After the trial, something shifted between us. The shared trauma had bound us together, and she started coming around more often, helping with the house, bringing over books she thought Ellie would like, or just hanging out, talking about everything and nothing. "Clara, you really didn't have to redo the guest room just for me," Amy said one afternoon as she helped me peel off old wallpaper. "It's not just for you. It's your room, whenever you need it. Your family now, Amy," I said, and I meant it. She smiled, a little watery-eyed, and we went back to our task. In a twist I never saw coming, Michael, my ex-husband, started showing up too. First, it was to drop off Ellie or pick her up, but then it became coffee visits, then dinners. We talked a lot, about Ellie, about our past, about how we could never have imagined our lives intertwining like this again. "Clara, I appreciate you letting me back in, after everything," Michael said to me one evening as we sat on the new deck, watching Ellie and Amy chase each other around the backyard. "Michael, we're navigating through uncharted waters, but I think we're doing just fine," I replied, the ease between us a pleasant surprise. The relationship with Michael evolved, slow and steady. We were parents first, friends second, and if there was a hint of something more, we let it grow at its own pace. Ellie thrived in the new environment. Her laughter filled the house, her smiles more frequent and brighter. Seeing her like this, I knew we had made the right decision. "Mom, look. I taught Amy how to make slime," Ellie exclaimed one Saturday morning, her hands and face speckled with glitter. Amy came into the kitchen, looking like she had fought a battle with a unicorn and lost. "Yeah, she did. I think I have glitter in my hair still," she said, trying to brush it out, but laughing. Watching them together, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had weathered a storm, fought hard battles, and now, here we were, building a life full of hope and happiness. As the days grew warmer, our little household found its rhythm. We were a patchwork family, each of us with our own scars and stories, but together, we were whole. Hi, I'm Anna. Been crunching numbers as an accountant for the better part of a decade now. My husband, John, works in IT, a real tech wizard, which comes in handy more often than you'd think. We've got 2 kids, Lucas and Lily, a pair of energetic sprouts who keep our lives colorful and, honestly, a bit chaotic. We've just moved into our new house, a dream I've had since the kids were born. You see, John and I decided early on that we wanted a proper home for the kids to grow up in, not just any place would do. So, we scrimped and saved, and finally, after years of both of us grinding away, we managed to buy our own place. The house wasn't just a building, it was a promise we made to each other and to our kids. The day we moved in, I remember standing in the empty living room before the furniture arrived, envisioning the memories we'd create. John wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, we did it, babe. We're home. Yeah, we did it, I replied, my voice a mix of exhaustion and elation. Let's just hope we survive the decorating part without killing each other. We spent that evening sorting through boxes, assembling furniture, and laying down rules for the kids, simple stuff, like no markers on the walls and no cookies in bed. It was late when we finally crashed, the sound of the kids even breathing from the next rooms, the best kind of lullaby. Things were good. Settling in took less time than I thought, mostly because I decided to work from home. My boss, bless his heart, was more supportive than I'd hoped. He let me handle the company's accounts remotely, as long as I kept up my numbers, and I always do. It wasn't more than a couple of months after the move that we got a surprise. I was in the kitchen, trying to figure out if the coffee maker was just complicated or if I was caffeine deprived, when I heard a knock at the door. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I opened the door and there stood Susan, John's mom. My mother-in-law had that look about her, the kind that said she was up to something but you wouldn't figure it out until it was too late. Susan, this is a surprise. What brings you here? I managed to keep my voice steady, but internally, I was already bracing myself. Oh, Anna, darling, I just missed my grandkids so much. And you know, I've always dreamed of living in a big house like this, she said, her eyes darting around, already making herself at home without an invitation. John came down the stairs, having heard his mother's voice. Mom, you should have called. We would have picked you up. Nonsense, I wanted to surprise you. Besides, it's time I spent some quality time with my grandkids, Susan declared, planting a loud kiss on John's cheek. I glanced at John, trying to gauge his reaction. He shrugged slightly, a silent message that read, "What can we do?" It had been a week since Susan plunked herself in our living room. Every morning, I'd tiptoe past her makeshift bedroom to the kitchen, the tension as thick as the burnt toast I'd toss in the trash before anyone could smell it. The whole arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but with each passing day, the discomfort burrowed deeper into our home life. That Tuesday, I had to scoot out early for a rare in-person meeting at work, which meant slipping on real shoes and trading my sweatpants for slacks. As I was leaving, Susan was just a silhouette under the blankets on the couch. I whispered a goodbye to the kids and left before the sun was fully up. When I returned, the house was eerily quiet. I called out, "Lucas? Lily," expecting to hear them thundering down the stairs. Instead, Susan appeared at the bottom of the staircase, her smile wide like she'd won the lottery. "Anna, dear, come see what I've done upstairs." A little surprise for everyone. Her enthusiasm grated on my nerves, but I followed, my curiosity piqued despite my apprehension. As we reached the top of the stairs, the first thing I noticed was the stark emptiness of Lucas's room. My heart sank. Where all his superhero posters had been, now hung drab curtains and pictures of landscapes that screamed boring adult lives here. "What the hell, Susan?" The words flew out of my mouth before I could catch them. She flung her arms wide, as if presenting on a game show. I moved Lucas into Lily's room. "They're young, they can share, can't they? And look, I brought up some of my things to make it more comfortable for me." I stormed into Lily's room, now cluttered with 2 sets of everything, and my kids sitting on the bed looking miserable. Lucas's eyes were red, and Lily's lip quivered. "Mom, why do we have to share now? We had our own rooms," Lucas complained, his voice cracking. "I know, honey. I didn't know about this," I said, my voice soft but seething inside as I turned to face Susan. "I sold my house to be closer to you all. I have nowhere else to go," she declared, a triumphant look in her eye. I felt the room spin a bit. "You what? John didn't tell me that." "Well, he knows now. And this is my room now. End of discussion," she said, walking into Lucas's old room and shutting the door with a definitive thud. I gathered the kids and went downstairs, my mind racing. When John got home, I was waiting for him, the kids eating their dinner quietly, the tension thick. "John, we need to talk. Now," I said, pulling him aside as soon as he walked through the door. "Your mother's moved into Lucas's room." Moved the kids into the same room without asking us. And she told me she sold her house. He ran his hands through his hair, looking as shocked as I felt. She sold her house? She didn't tell me that. This is crazy. I'll talk to her. That night, after the kids were in bed and the house was quiet, John knocked on his mother's door, trying to talk some sense into her. The muffled voices went back and forth, his tone pleading, hers defiant. I sat on our bed, thinking about how our dream home had quickly turned into a battleground. John came back an hour later, looking defeated. She won't budge. Says this is her right. I'm sorry, Anna. I don't know what to do. Every day was a new adventure and patience. I had set up my office in the corner of our bedroom, the only spot I could claim as somewhat quiet for my work calls. My job as an accountant wasn't something you could pause and play at your convenience, but try explaining that to Susan. This particular Thursday, I was deep into reconciling some accounts, my laptop spread with spreadsheets and reports, when Susan barged in, a bag of shopping swinging from her arm. Anna, you spend all day on that thing. Don't you ever take a break? She chided, not caring that I was mid-call with a client. Susan, I'm on a call, I hissed, covering the microphone with my hand, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. Oh, it sounds more like you're chatting with a girlfriend. She chuckled and shrugged, setting down her shopping on the table, spreading her latest treasures across my work area. I muted the call, my heart pounding. Susan, I need this space to be clear. I'm working. Working? Looks more like you're just fiddling on the computer. Back in my day, work meant getting your hands dirty, she scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Unwilling to argue further, I unmuted the call and tried to focus, but my concentration had shattered. As I wrapped up the call, Susan had already floated away, probably to stow her new haul of discount buys, useless figurines and out-of-fashion clothes that seemed to multiply each day. Later that afternoon, the sound of crying broke my concentration again. It was Lucas, sobbing over something in the living room. Dropping everything, I rushed to him, finding him holding an empty comic book sleeve. Mom, my Spider-Man comics are gone. I left them right here. My heart sank. Let's go ask Susan, sweetie. Maybe she moved them. We found Susan in her room, the door ajar, surrounded by piles of her shopping conquests. Susan, did you see Lucas's comics? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. She glanced up, her nose wrinkling in disgust. Those old things? I threw them out. They were cluttering up the living room, and I can't stand spiders. Creepy, crawling things. No need for that nonsense in the house. Lucas's face crumpled, tears streaming down his cheeks. But Grandma, they were my favorite. Spider-Man isn't real. He doesn't crawl. I don't care. I don't like them, and they're gone, Susan snapped, turning back to her clutter. As Lucas calmed down, I stepped into the hallway, my mind racing. Susan's disregard for what wasn't hers was growing unbearable. Every inch of space was slowly being consumed by her belongings, her rules, her presence. From the crack of dawn to the hush of night, Susan's presence was like a cloud, casting a shadow over our family's daily life. And with each passing day, her comments and criticisms grew sharper, cutting into the fabric of our routine and comfort. It was a Tuesday morning, and I had just finished getting the kids ready for school when Susan decided to comment on my appearance. Anna, when was the last time you had a manicure? You really should try to keep yourself up, you know. I glanced down at my hands, nails chipped from household chores, and typing furiously on my laptop. I've been busy, Susan. You know, taking care of the kids and working from home. She sked, shaking her head. A little effort wouldn't hurt. John would appreciate it. Ignoring the sting of her words, I went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. But as soon as I served the eggs and toast, Susan was on to her next critique. Is this how you usually cook? It's a bit bland, dear. You really should take some cooking lessons. The kids ate silently, casting me worried glances. I forced a smile, trying to keep the morning from souring further. Later that day, when the kids came home from school, their laughter and lively chatter filled the house. It was a sound I cherished, one that Susan apparently found annoying. "Kids, could you keep it down? I'm trying to watch my shows," she called out from the living room, her tone sharp and commanding. The kids shuffled away, and I felt my frustration mounting. Not wanting to argue in front of them, I retreated to the kitchen, only to overhear Susan mumbling about the noise. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Susan decided it was time to lecture me on my role in the family. "Anna, I think it's time we start dinner with a little thank you to John. After all, he's the one providing for all of us." I clenched my jaw, setting down my fork. "Actually, Susan, I pay the mortgage. That's $2,800 a month from my salary." Susan waved her hand dismissively as John chimed in. "Mom, Anna's right. She's the one handling the mortgage. I take care of other expenses, but we both contribute equally." "Oh, please," Susan scoffed. "If it weren't for my son, you wouldn't have this house or your comforts." John's face tightened, and he looked like he was about to argue further, but he caught my eye and let out a sigh. We had been through this conversation too many times already. The meal passed with an uncomfortable silence, the clinking of cutlery punctuating the tension. After clearing the dishes, I found myself in the laundry room, folding clothes more aggressively than necessary. John came in, his expression weary. "Anna, I'm sorry about my mom. I don't know what to do to make her understand." I folded a shirt and stacked it with a little too much force. "I don't know either, John. But we can't go on like this. It's like walking on eggshells in our own home." "We'll figure something out," John said, though the assurance sounded hollow. "Maybe we can sit her down and talk it through again. Lay out everything clearly." I nodded, though doubt nagged at me. Susan had made up her mind about how things should be, and it seemed no amount of talking would change her view. This morning started just like any other Tuesday, with me dropping the kids off at school, before heading back to the house. I was prepping for an important online conference with my boss and a couple of key executives from the company, a meeting that could significantly impact my career. However, the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was off. The house was bustling with noise, laughter, and the clinking of dishes. Susan had invited her friends over for an impromptu breakfast gathering, apparently turning our living room into her personal social club. I sighed, rubbing my temples as I poured myself a quick cup of coffee. Trying to stay calm, I headed to my office, hoping to find some sanctuary. As I settled down, adjusting my webcam and reviewing my notes one last time, I could hear the muffled chatter and laughter from the living room. I tried my best to block it out, focusing on the upcoming discussion. But just as the meeting started and I began to explain the quarterly projections, the door to my office flew open. Susan, leading her troop of friends, burst in loudly asking, "Anna, why didn't you make us some coffee too? And where's our breakfast? You can't just ignore your guests." Stunned, I muted my microphone, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Susan, I'm in the middle of a work meeting. Can this wait?" I hissed, trying to keep my voice low and calm. "No, it can't. You think because you're working, you can neglect your duties as a hostess?" Susan retorted, her voice rising with every word. Frustrated, I pointed at her sharply. "Keep it down, I'm working." In response, Susan's expression twisted into one of defiance, and in a dramatic gesture, she grabbed my laptop and threw it onto the floor. The screen went black, the sound of my boss's voice cut off abruptly as the machine hit the carpet with a thud. "Go and make us breakfast," she demanded, as if she had every right. Without a word, I stood up, walked over to her, and firmly guided her out of the office, closing the door behind her. My heart was racing, a mixture of anger and shock numbing my senses. I picked up my broken laptop, feeling the sting of tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from sheer frustration. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and dialed my boss, explaining what had just happened. To my relief, he was more understanding than I expected. "I get it, Anna. Family situations can be tough. Just see if you can sort it out, okay? We need you focused. After hanging up, I could hear Susan in the living room, loudly proclaiming to her audience, "You have to teach these young ones how to behave. If you let them, they'll walk all over you. It's our duty to put them in their place." The audacity of her words made my blood boil, but I knew I had to hold it together. Later that evening, when John came home, I told him everything. His face darkened with each word I spoke. "He did what? That's it. She's paying for a new laptop," he said, his jaw set in anger. "This has gone far enough, Anna. I'm sorry. I'll handle it." He confronted his mother about the incident. Susan, perhaps realizing she had crossed a line, suddenly clutched at her chest, her face contorted in pain. "I'm not feeling well," she gasped, her voice shaky. "Mom, are you okay?" John's tone shifted from anger to concern in a heartbeat. "I need to lie down. This is too much for me," Susan said dramatically before retreating to her room and locking herself in. The next morning, Susan declared she'd be retreating to a boarding house to restore her health, and I watched her pack with a practiced calm, masking the storm of thoughts whirling in my head. Her sudden declaration of illness, miraculously timed to avoid the fallout from breaking my laptop, seemed too convenient. John, equally skeptical, tried once more to broach the topic of the broken laptop, but she dodged his concerns with an airy wave, promising to discuss it later. As her taxi disappeared down the driveway, John turned to me, a mixture of relief and resolve on his face. "Okay, what's the plan?" he asked, as we stood in the quiet aftermath of her departure. "You know how your mom freaked out over Lucas's Spider-Man comics because she hates spiders?" I began, watching his reaction closely. John's eyebrows rose, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, she can't stand them. Why?" "Let's just say, what if we took that fear and decorated the house with it? Not just any decorations, but make it look like a spider den," I suggested, the words out before I could reconsider. John chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief before giving a firm nod. "Let's do it. It might just be crazy enough to work. And hey, Lucas will get a kick out of it." Feeling a mixture of excitement and guilt, I called a local artist known for their theatrical set designs. I explained our needs: realistic, lifelike spiders painted on the walls, cobwebs that looked like they were spun by giant arachnids, and an overall ambience that screamed spider den. The artist was intrigued and slightly amused by the project, promising to start the next day. John and I stood back, watching the children and the changing decor. "You think she'll ever want to come back after this?" he asked, a twinge of uncertainty in his voice. I shrugged, watching a painter add the finishing touches to a particularly grotesque arachnid above the fireplace. "I don't know. But I hope it makes her think twice about how she treats this place, our home." As the day of Susan's return neared, the house looked less like the family home it had been and more like a set from a horror movie. I had mixed feelings as I surveyed the work. It was beautifully horrifying and served a purpose, but part of me felt guilty about using Susan's phobia against her. The morning Susan was due back, tension buzzed through the house like electricity. John and I exchanged nervous glances as we heard her taxi pull up outside. Susan breezed into the house, her usual air of entitlement surrounding her like a cloak. She didn't even glance around at the transformed decor, fixated only on retreating to her room for some rest after her exhausting retreat. As soon as she opened the door to her room, though, her composure shattered. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the house as she stumbled back, her hands clutching at her chest. "What is this? What have you done?" The walls, covered in the eeriest, most lifelike spiders and webs, seemed to close in on her. She bolted from the room, her eyes wide with terror, only to find that the rest of the house matched her room. Spiders in every corner, on every wall, our home had become a den of fear for her. Susan ran down the hallway, screaming, "Remove this! Remove this at once!" Calmly, I stepped into her path, my voice steady. "Susan, this is our house, and we decide how to decorate it. We like it this way." John joined me, adding, "We can't afford any changes right now, not after what happened because of you." Her face went pale, her eyes darting around as if the spiders might jump off the walls. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "Your little stunt with Anna's laptop got her fired. We're tight on money now. If you're going to stay, you'll need to contribute $2,800 a month for the mortgage," John lied smoothly, "the fabrication necessary to press our advantage." Susan gasped, clutching her heart again. "This is outrageous. You can't do this to me. I'm leaving. No one appreciates anything I do. I'm not staying in this horror house." As she scrambled to pack her things, I blocked her way at the door. "Before you leave, you owe us $2,000 for the laptop you broke." The color drained from her face, replaced by a flush of anger. She yanked her checkbook from her purse and scribbled furiously. Slamming the check into my hand, she lifted her chin proudly. "There. Now, I'm leaving for good." John and I watched as she hauled her suitcase out the door, her head high, but her shoulders tense. As the door closed behind her, the tension in the air dissolved, replaced by a collective sigh of relief. We turned to each other, John wrapping his arms around me, both of us laughing, a bit from relief, more from disbelief at how things had turned out. "We did it, Anna. It's over." Lucas and Lily came bounding over, their faces bright with smiles. "Is Grandma really gone?" Lucas asked, his voice a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "She's gone, buddy," John confirmed, ruffling his son's hair. "The house is ours again. We can keep the spiders, right?" Lily asked, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "We'll see, honey," I laughed, kissing her forehead. "We'll see." That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, their rooms finally free of Susan's overbearing presence, I felt a peace settle over me. We had our home back, our lives back, and while the method was unconventional, the result was all that mattered. I continued working from home as an accountant, still seated at my trusty desk by the window, overlooking the garden where the kids played. Of course, I hadn't really lost my job, that had been a fib to push Susan to take some responsibility, and thankfully, it worked. Life without Susan was less dramatic. Lucas dove deeper into his comic books, often sprawled across his spider-webbed floor, sketching his own superheroes. Lily had taken to gardening, her little patch outside blooming under her careful attention, a stark contrast to the faux arachnid menace indoors. As for Susan, last we heard, she'd moved into a nursing home. Not surprisingly, rumors filtered back to us through the grapevine, she was up to her old tricks, bickering with the administration and quarreling with other residents. Some people never change, I mused aloud after a call from a relative who had visited her. John shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "Let's just be glad she's spinning her web somewhere else." And true enough, life had become simpler without her daily dramas. We repaired relationships with friends and neighbors, some of whom Susan had alienated with her nosiness and complaints. Invitations started coming back in for backyard barbecues and birthday parties, social gatherings we had avoided during Susan's tenure in our home. One day, as I was setting up for a video conference call with a client, I caught sight of Lucas and Lily outside, laughing as they chased each other around the garden, ducking under sheets hung out to dry. The normalcy of it filled me with a profound sense of contentment. "I never realized how much tension there was until it was gone," I told John later that evening. He nodded, wrapping an arm around me. "We did what we had to do, Anna. For our family. Our home was our sanctuary once more, the kids were happier, and John and I had found our way back to each other after all the strain." The spiders on the walls served as a reminder of what we had overcome, a quirky symbol of our family's resilience.